Every night, my new husband handed me my medication and watched until I swallowed all 3 pills before turning off the light. He called it love. Until one night, the white pill rolled under the bed, and I pretended I had taken it. At 2:13 a.m., I woke fully clear for the first time in months and heard a woman's voice rising from the locked basement. I crept down and heard him whisper, 40 days. After the guardianship hearing, everything becomes ours. In 2 folders, I found names before mine. She'd said at my last appointment, "This is a story about trust broken in the quietest way." Before we begin, leave me a comment. Below, what's the weather like where you are right now? I genuinely love hearing from you. Some details in this story have been fictionalized to emphasize the message and deepen the reflection. What truly matters is the lesson at its heart. For 14 months, I took the pills without asking what they were. The bedroom door opened at 7:15, same as every morning. Tanya Whitfield, 54 years old, with the kind of smile that made you forget what you were about to ask, entered carrying the tray. 2 green pills, 1 white, a glass of warm water that caught the January light. I used to design buildings. Half of Portland's skyline came from blueprints. I drafted the tower on 5th Avenue, the hotel complex near the waterfront residential projects in the Pearl District. Leland Whitfield, 68 years old, retired architect. That's who I was supposed to be. But the man reaching for the glass had a trembling hand. "Did you sleep well, darling?" Tanya asked. I looked at the pills. Green, green, white. Same order, same configuration. 14 months of mornings, and I'd never once asked their names. "I slept well," I said. I didn't remember how long I'd slept. My hand shook as I picked up the first green pill. For a moment, I thought it was the glass trembling. Then I realized it wasn't the glass. It was me. "You're doing so much better," Tanya said. "Dr. Faulkner says your progress has been remarkable." I swallowed the first pill, then the second, then the white one. The water was always warm, never cold, as if she'd calibrated the exact temperature. "I'll make breakfast," she said. "Eggs. That would be nice." She kissed my forehead, light, brief, the kind of kiss you give someone fragile, and left the room. The door clicked shut with a sound I'd heard every morning for 14 months. I sat in the Victorian mansion bedroom overlooking the misty garden and tried to remember what the pills were for. Memory issues, Tanya had said. Circulation problems. Something about my heart. Dr. Faulkner had prescribed them, and I'd nodded because that made sense. Doctors prescribed things. Wives brought them. Husbands took them. When does a habit become a prison? When you stop noticing the bars. By late morning, I was at my first-floor office desk, surrounded by bookshelves filled with architecture journals I no longer opened. Sunlight slanted through the window, illuminating dust that drifted like sediment in still water. I was trying to recall a client's name. Howard something. Or Harold. We'd worked together for 6 years on the waterfront hotel. I could picture his face, clearly the way he gestured with his left hand when excited. But his last name had disappeared from my mind like water through a sieve. I opened the desk drawer looking for old contracts. Instead, I found a handwritten note on yellow legal paper. My handwriting, I recognized the slant of the letters, but I didn't recognize the content. Meadow called, concerned, told her I'm fine. I stared at those words. Meadow was my daughter, 38 years old, an attorney in Seattle. She called every few weeks, dutiful but distant. But I didn't remember writing this note. I didn't remember the conversation. I didn't even recognize the handwriting as my current hand. It was steadier, firmer. The penmanship of someone whose fingers didn't shake. When had I written this last month? On the corner of the desk sat a framed photograph, Sadie Whitfield, my first wife, taken at the coast 3 months before she died. She was laughing at something I'd said, her gray hair loose in the wind. Sadie had died 4 years ago in what was ruled a car accident on her way home from an art exhibition at the Archer Gallery. December 2016. I remembered the funeral, the rain, the closed casket Meadow standing beside me with her hand on my shoulder. Then came 11 months of silence. 11 months of empty rooms and uneaten dinners. Then Tanya. She'd appeared at a gallery opening in November 2017, introduced by a mutual friend whose name I could no longer recall. She was warm, attentive, interested in architecture, in my work, in the stories about buildings that had stood for 30 years. We married 8 months later, and she moved into the Victorian mansion in West Hills, where Sadie and I had lived for 2 decades, and for 14 months she'd brought me pills every morning. I looked at Sadie's photograph and thought, do you know this? Grief has a shape. It's the space where someone used to be. But what do you call the feeling when someone new fills that space too perfectly, when the warmth feels rehearsed, when the smile arrives on schedule like medication? That night after Tanya had fallen asleep beside me, I stood in the master bathroom and looked at my reflection. The face staring back was older than it should be, frailer. The kind of old that comes from something other than time. My hand still trembled when I gripped the sink. Sadie died 4 years ago in what they called an accident. Brake failure on a wet road. The investigator said these things happen, old cars, worn components, bad timing. I'd accepted that because what else was there to do? You can't argue with physics. But standing there in the dark bathroom, watching my own hand shake, I wondered for the first time, Sadie, do you know about the woman sleeping in your bed? Do you know about the pills she brings me every morning? Do you know that I can't remember the name of a client I worked with for 6 years, that I don't recognize my own handwriting, that some mornings I wake up and don't remember falling asleep? I looked at my reflection, older, frailer, trembling, and thought about timing. 11 months between Sadie's death and Tanya's arrival. Not too soon to seem opportunistic, not too long to seem calculated. Just the right amount of time for a lonely widower to be grateful for company. Tanya arriving with her warm smile and her morning pills fitting into my life like a key made for a lock she'd studied a long time. And 2 nights later, I would hear sounds from the basement that would answer every question I was too afraid to ask. The first time I woke at 1:47 a.m. in 14 months, I knew something had changed. For all those months, the pills had kept me unconscious until 8 in the morning, deep, dreamless sleep that felt less like rest and more like erasure. But on January 25th, I opened my eyes in complete darkness, the red numbers on the bedside clock glowing like a warning. 1:47. Tanya slept beside me, her breathing steady and even. I lay perfectly still, trying to understand what had woken me. Then I heard it muffled sounds from below, cushioned footsteps on concrete, the soft closing of a drawer, the basement. I sat up slowly, careful not to disturb the mattress. My heart was beating harder than it should have been, or maybe this was how hearts were supposed to beat, and I'd forgotten. 14 months of chemical calm had made me forget what alertness felt like. I moved into the hallway. The Victorian mansion was dark except for a thin line of yellow light visible beneath the basement door. I'd installed that door myself 20 years ago when Sadie wanted a wine cellar solid oak brass hinges that didn't creak. I stood there with my hand on the doorknob listening. Footsteps again, the sound of something being moved, heavy, deliberate. Then silence. My hand trembled on the knob, not from the pills this time, from something else. I didn't open the door. Instead, I went back to bed and lay there staring at the ceiling until the alarm went off at 7:15, wondering how many nights I'd slept through sounds I should have heard. How many nights had I been unconscious while something happened in the basement of my own house? That morning, Tanya brought the pills on schedule. 2 green, 1 white, warm water. I swallowed them while watching her face for any sign that she knew I'd been awake. But her smile was exactly the same, warm, practiced, perfectly calibrated. "Did you sleep well, darling?" "I did," I lied, "but I heard something strange last night, from the basement." Her expression didn't change. She adjusted the breakfast tray on my lap with the same gentle efficiency she'd shown for 14 months. "The water pipes, darling," she said. "The cold makes them expand. This old house creaks." It sounded like footsteps. "Victorian plumbing," she smiled. "I'll have someone look at it if it bothers you." The water pipe. Of course it was the water pipe. I wanted to believe that. I'd believed so many things. But that night and the night after, I listened. The sounds didn't return. Maybe it had been the pipes. Maybe I was imagining conspiracy in ordinary household noises, seeing patterns in coincidence, because my mind was starting to fray from whatever those pills were doing to it. Then came January 27th, 11 p.m. Tanya sat on the edge of the bed with the evening medication the routine had expanded 6 months ago to include nighttime doses. 2 green pills, 1 white pill. She handed me the water glass and I took the green ones first, then reached for the white pill. It slipped. A small fumble, barely noticeable. The white pill tumbled from my fingers and fell into the narrow gap between the bed and the wall, that space where things disappear and are never retrieved. Dust and lost buttons, and now 1 white pill. "Oh," Tanya said, starting to rise. "Let me get another—" "It's fine," I said quickly. "I took the important ones. The green ones are for my heart, right? The white one is just for sleep." She hesitated. For just a fraction of a second, something crossed her face that I couldn't read. Then the smile returned. "If you're sure, darling, sleep well." She kissed my forehead, turned off the light, and settled beside me. Within minutes, her breathing had slowed to the rhythm of sleep. I lay in the darkness and waited for the familiar drowsiness to pull me under. It didn't come. 1 hour passed. 2 hours. At midnight, I was still awake, staring at the ceiling with a clarity that felt almost violent after 14 months of fog. My mind was working in ways it hadn't worked since when? Since before Tanya arrived with her pills and her warm smile and her perfectly timed concern. 3 hours passed. I realized this was the first time in 14 months I'd been awake at 2 in the morning. Clarity is a gift and a curse. For 14 months, I had been blurred, dimmed, manageable. Now I was awake, and I could hear everything. At 2:13 a.m., I heard the basement door open. Tanya's side of the bed was empty. I hadn't felt her leave. She must have moved like smoke, practiced and silent. But now I could hear her voice coming from below, muffled by floorboards and distance, but unmistakable. And another voice. A woman's voice lower than Tanya's, calm and professional. Not the voice of someone startled to be in a stranger's basement at 2 in the morning. The voice of someone who belonged here, someone expected. I couldn't make out the words, just the cadence. A conversation, an exchange of information, the tone people use when they're reviewing a project timeline or discussing logistics. They were talking about something. They were talking about someone. I pressed my ear to the floor, trying to catch individual words through the old oak planks. Fragments reached me. March 14th. Signature won't be, if he's still... Then Tanya's voice clearer. "He's stable. We have time." The other voice responded too low to hear. I lay there on the bedroom floor in my nightclothes, ear pressed to the wood like a child eavesdropping on his parents, and understood with perfect, terrible clarity they were talking about me. Not with concern, not with love, not with the worry a wife expresses about an ailing husband. With the tone of people discussing an asset they were in the process of acquiring. I stayed there until the voices stopped, until I heard the basement door close, until Tanya's footsteps whispered up the stairs. I was back in bed, eyes closed, breathing steady by the time she slipped under the covers beside me. She thought I was asleep. She thought the white pill had done its job, that I was unconscious and manageable, and 14 months deep into whatever they had planned. But I was awake, and I had just learned that there were 2 of them. I descended the basement stairs in complete darkness, each step measured, silent, necessary. The voices were clearer now. Through the wine cellar door, left slightly ajar, yellow lamplight spilled across the concrete floor. I could see Tanya's silhouette standing beside the old oak table we used for wine tastings years ago. And beside her, another woman I'd never seen before. Renee Gallagher, I would later learn. 49 years old, a former clinical psychologist who'd lost her license in California and acquired a fake pharmacy degree from a diploma mill in Mexico City. But that night, all I knew was her voice, low, professional, emotionless, as she discussed my deterioration like a weather forecast. Guardianship hearing March 14th. The woman said, eyes on her laptop screen. 45 days remaining. My chest tightened. 45 days. Dr. Faulkner needs to sign 1 more competency review before February 7th. She continued. After that, the timeline is locked. Tanya shifted her weight. Does he seem suspicious? Impossible. Renee's fingers moved across the keyboard without looking up. The current dose is enough to maintain the cognitive state. We just need him compliant enough to sign the papers before the hearing. And if he doesn't, he will. They always do at this stage. I pressed myself against the cold stone wall, trying to control my breathing. 45 days. If you've ever been told you have a deadline for your own life, you understand what happens in your chest when the number becomes real. It's not panic. It's a kind of cold mathematical certainty, like watching a train approach and knowing exactly when it will arrive. The property transfers are ready, Tanya asked. Drafted and waiting. Once the guardianship is established, we move everything into the trust structure within 72 hours. Same as before. Same as before. Those 3 words hung in the air like smoke. I didn't wait to hear more. I climbed back up the stairs with the same careful silence, each footfall placed with precision on the edges of the steps where old wood doesn't creak. Back in bed, I lay beside Tanya's empty side and counted the hours until morning. 45 days. They'd scheduled my life to end and given themselves a timeline to do it. I had less than that to stop them. When Tanya returned to bed an hour later, I kept my breathing steady and slow, the performance of sleep I'd been giving for 14 months. She settled beside me, and I listened to her breath even out into the rhythm of someone with a clear conscience. Morning came with the usual ritual: pills, warm water, her smile. But this time, I watched her differently. I looked at her hands as they arranged the tray at the careful measurement of each gesture and saw not a wife, but an architect of something precise and practiced. "I have a meeting this morning," she said after I'd swallowed the medication. "I'll be back around noon." "Take your time," I said. I watched from the bedroom window as her car pulled out of the driveway and turned the corner. Then I waited 5 more minutes to be certain. 5 minutes that felt like 5 hours. Then I went to the basement. The filing cabinet was new. I'd never seen it before, hidden behind the Bordeaux wine rack in the far corner. Electronic lock on the front, the kind that requires a code. But I'd designed this house. I knew Victorian mansions always had backup systems, mechanical fail-safes for when modern technology failed. I used an old architectural drafting tool to trip the mechanical override. The drawer clicked open. Inside, manila folders arranged with surgical precision. The first one had my name typed on the tab. I opened it with hands that had stopped trembling, not from medication, but from clarity. Medication log lorazepam, 1 milligram quetiapine, 25 milligrams administered in evening beverage dose, increased incrementally over 14-month period. Dose adjustment schedule by date. Progress notes: subject compliance 100%. Cognitive decline progressing as expected. Memory degradation. Phase 3. Tremor manifestation. Confirmed week 18. Subject: they'd tracked me like a lab experiment. Dosage, adjustment, progress, decline. I flipped through pages documenting my own erasure month by month, symptom by symptom. There were photographs of me at the kitchen table, unaware I was being documented. Me in the garden, me sleeping. Evidence not of care, of control. Resolved. 1 word, 2 women. Gone. 2 more manila folders arranged chronologically. The first unibarton. I opened it. Same medication logs, same dose adjustments, same progress tracking. Property transfer timeline showing a house in Beaverton and investment accounts totaling $400,000. Final note, dated August 2017, resolved Cedar Grove memory. Care facility, permanent placement, no family contact. The second folder, Inez Dunn. Similar documentation, medication schedule, cognitive decline tracking. Property worth $310,000 transferred through guardianship proceeding. Final note, March 2018. Resolved property transfer, complete subject relocated, file closed. I sat on the cold basement floor with 3 folders in my hands, 2 closed, 1 still open. 2 women whose names I'd never heard. 2 lives systematically dismantled with the same medications, the same timeline, the same cold documentation. 1 locked away in a memory care facility where no one would believe her if she said she'd been poisoned. 1 stripped of everything she owned and disappeared into a system that had already forgotten her name. Resolved. As if people are problems to be solved. as if 70 years of a life can be reduced to a manila folder and a final note typed in 12-point font. Una Barton and Inez Dunn. I wasn't the first, and if I didn't act, I wouldn't be the last. I closed the folders, carefully returned them to exactly the position I'd found them, and reset the cabinet lock. Upstairs, I looked at the calendar on the kitchen wall. January 29th, 2021. 44 days until March 14th. But first I needed to know if Una and Inez were still alive. Sadie had left me one warning I'd never found hidden where only someone looking for the past would discover it. I needed documentation. If I was going to find Una Barton and Inez Dunn, I needed contact information addresses, anything that might have existed before Tanya entered my life. Old tax returns, estate planning documents, the kind of paperwork that accumulates when you've lived 68 years and designed buildings for 40 of them. I pulled boxes from the office bookshelves, architectural drawings from the 80s and 90s, rolled blueprints tied with string that had gone brittle with age, the tower on Fifth Avenue, the waterfront hotel, projects whose names I could remember even if I couldn't remember the clients. Between two boxes marked 1992 and 1994, something small and green. A diary, leather-bound no bigger than my hand. I pulled it free and opened to the first page. Sadie's handwriting. I'd recognize it anywhere, the careful loops, the slight rightward slant, the way she crossed her T's with a line that always extended just a bit too far. Personal Thoughts 2014 to 2016, written in her hand at the top of the first page. I stood there in the afternoon light holding my dead wife's diary and realized I'd never known it existed. 3 years of her thoughts, her observations, her private interior life, hidden behind architectural drawings, because she knew I'd never move those boxes. They were too heavy, too much past. She'd hidden it where I'd never look unless I was desperate. I sat at the desk and opened to a random page. June 2015. Sunday morning. Thomas made pancakes and burned the first batch like always. I didn't tell him the second batch was also slightly burned. Some things you let people believe they've gotten right. I turned the page, September 2015. Meadow called. She's thinking about the attorney position in Seattle. I told her to take it. Thomas wants her closer, but she needs to build her own life. I remember what it was like to live in your parents' shadow. Another page, March 2016. Thomas asked if I still wanted to go to Italy. I said someday. But someday is what you say when you think you have unlimited time. I should have said yes. She wrote about Sunday mornings, about the light in the kitchen, about dreams deferred and small disappointments and the ordinary architecture of a marriage. She wrote about me, about my work, my habits, the way I'd get absorbed in a project and forget to eat lunch. She wrote about me more than I ever knew she noticed. Love doesn't end when someone dies. It transforms into a weight you carry, made of every moment you didn't pay enough attention. I turned pages moving forward through 2016. Spring entries about the garden. Summer entries about Meadow's new job. August. I stopped. August 14th, 2016. A man named Jay approached me at the Archer Gallery exhibition last month. He said he was a financial consultant. Asked a lot of questions about our trust about the house, about Thomas's retirement plans. Very polished, very interested. I didn't like him. There was something in his eyes, the way he looked at our life like he was appraising furniture. My hands went cold. Jay. September 2016. Saw Jay again at the coffee shop on Burnside. Coincidence. He acted surprised but sat at the table next to mine. Asked more questions: how long we'd lived in the house, whether Meadow was an only child, whether we had other family. I kept my answers brief. Thomas would say I'm being paranoid. Maybe I am. Sadie died in December 2016, 3 months after she wrote that entry. I flipped forward, my heart beating too fast, looking for more mentions of Jay. Nothing in October. 2 entries in November about preparing for Thanksgiving, about the first frost, about wanting to plant tulip bulbs before the ground froze. Then November 28th, 2016, 3 weeks before her death. Thomas is getting busier with the Seattle project, working late most nights. I don't want to bother him with unnecessary worries. Maybe I'm wrong about Jay. Maybe he really was just a financial consultant who happened to attend the same gallery opening shop at the same coffee shop. I'm probably being paranoid. This is what happens when you read too many mystery novels. That was the last entry. The rest of the pages were blank. 3 weeks later, on a rainy December evening, Sadie's car went off the road on her way home from an art exhibition. Brake failure, the investigator said. Old car-worn components, wet conditions, an accident. If someone you loved once wrote, "I don't want to bother you with unnecessary worries," go back, check. Those worries might be the only warning you get. I sat at the desk as afternoon shadows lengthened across the floor and understood what I'd failed to see 4 years ago. Sadie had noticed Jay in August, written about her unease in September, decided not to bother me with it in November because I was busy with a project in Seattle, a project I could barely remember, now something about mixed-use development that had seemed so important at the time, more important than listening to my wife say she didn't like how someone looked at our life. 3 weeks later, she was dead. And 11 months after that, Tanya appeared at a gallery opening with her warm smile and her carefully researched interest in architecture and her pills that made me forget my own name. I closed the diary carefully the way you close something sacred. I didn't hide it again. I placed it on the shelf beside Sadie's photograph where I could see it every day, a reminder of what inattention costs. The math was simple and brutal. Jay had approached Sadie at the Archer Gallery in summer 2016. Sadie died in December 2016. Tanya appeared in my life in November 2017. 11 months. The same amount of time it took me to be lonely enough, grief-stricken enough, isolated enough to be vulnerable to someone who seemed to understand loss. They'd waited, planned, studied the exact moment when a widower would be most susceptible to kindness. This wasn't Tanya's first attempt on this family. This was her second. And I'd been too busy building other people's dreams to notice someone was dismantling mine. I hadn't spoken to my daughter in 7 months, and the call I was about to make would either save my life or confirm that I'd lost her forever. Sadie's diary had shown me when this started. Una and Inez's files had shown me I wasn't the first. But if I was going to survive the next 43 days, I couldn't do it alone. And there was only one person who might still care enough to help if I hadn't destroyed that bridge completely. I sat in my Volvo in a supermarket parking lot 15 miles from the Victorian mansion, far enough that Tanya wouldn't question a grocery run that took too long, far enough that if she somehow tracked my phone, this would look like an errand, not evidence of clarity. Rain tapped against the windshield in a rhythm that matched my pulse. 9 p.m. on a Thursday night. The parking lot was nearly empty, just a few cars scattered under yellow sodium lights that turned the rain to gold. I held my phone and stared at Meadow's contact information. The photo was 3 years old, her at a restaurant in Seattle, smiling at something outside the frame, back when she still called regularly, back before I'd pushed her away with increasing irritation every time she suggested Tanya might not have my best interests at heart. Dad, don't you think it's strange she handles all your medications? Dad, why did she need access to your accounts so quickly? Dad, I'm worried about you. And I'd responded with the arrogance of a man who'd built half a city's skyline and thought that made him immune to being fooled. Meadow, you don't understand. Tanya has been nothing but supportive. Meadow, you're being paranoid. Meadow, maybe you're just uncomfortable seeing me move on from your mother. That last one had been 7 months ago. She'd stopped calling after that. I pressed dial before I could convince myself this was a mistake. 3 rings. 4. I started composing the voicemail in my head. Hello. Her voice was careful. Not warm, not cold. The voice you use when answering a call from someone who's hurt you, but you're not ready to show the wound. Meadow, it's Dad. Silence. Long enough that I could hear her breathing, could picture her in her Seattle apartment deciding whether to hang up. I need to see you, I said. It's important, and I need you not to tell anyone, not even Tanya. More silence, 10 seconds, 15. Then, Dad, I know you've been saying a lot of things lately about Tanya, about how I don't understand. Her voice carried 7 months of hurt carefully modulated into the professional tone she probably used with difficult clients. I could hear her building the wall, protecting herself from another round of accusations that she was jealous, paranoid, unable to accept that I'd moved on. If you've ever had to apologize to someone you wronged while your life depended on their forgiveness, you know what silence sounds like over a phone line. "You're right," I said. Another pause, shorter this time. Surprised. "What?" "You're right. About all of it. You tried to tell me and I didn't listen. You were worried and I told you that you were paranoid. You wanted to protect me and I told you that you were uncomfortable with me being happy." I gripped the steering wheel with my free hand. "I'm sorry." I'd been married twice, raised a daughter, run a successful architecture firm for 40 years, but I couldn't remember the last time I'd said those two words and meant them. The silence this time was different, not defensive, not guarded, just listening. "When do you need me to come?" she asked quietly. "As soon as you can, but you have to make it look normal. Just a daughter visiting her father. Don't let her know you're coming because I asked." Her, not Tanya. Not your wife, just her. "Yes. Dad, what's happening?" "Not on the phone when you get here." "Can you come this weekend?" "Saturday," she said. "I'll tell her I had a cancellation at work and thought I'd drive down. Casual visit." "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet." Her voice was still careful, but there was something underneath now. Something that sounded like the lawyer she'd become, sharp, analytical, ready to assess evidence. "Whatever you're about to tell me, it better be the truth." "It is." "Good, because I can't do this again, Dad. If this is just another—" "It's not, I promise you, Meadow, it's not." She exhaled. "Saturday. I'll text her tomorrow morning about the visit. Be surprised when she tells you." "I will." She hung up without saying goodbye. I sat in the Volvo surrounded by rain and darkness and the yellow glow of sodium lights. My hands weren't shaking. My mind was clear. For the first time in 14 months, I felt like the architect I used to be, someone who could look at a problem and design a solution. 43 days until the guardianship hearing. 43 days to gather proof that would hold up in court. 43 days to find Una Barton and Inez Dunn. 43 days to understand how they'd killed Sadie. 43 days to pretend I didn't know any of it. The strategic decision crystallized in the rain-soaked parking lot: no confrontation, no accusations, no letting them see that the white pill had fallen into the gap between the bed and the wall, that I'd heard their voices in the basement, that I'd found the files, that I'd read Sadie's diary. I needed to become who they thought I was, the slow-witted, confused old man whose memory was failing, whose hands trembled, who signed documents without reading them because his wife said they were important. Acting is a kind of armor. For 43 days, I would wear the mask of the man they thought they'd created, trembling, forgetful, harmless. I would take the pills and pretend they were working. I would ask the same questions twice. I would let Tanya guide me to the table where papers needed signing. I would be compliant, manageable, resolved. Right up until March 14th, when I would show them exactly how clear my mind had been all along. I started the car and drove home through the rain. When I walked in the door, Tanya was in the living room reading. "Did you get the groceries, darling?" she asked. I forgot what I went for. I said, letting my voice carry just the right note of confusion. I drove around for a while, trying to remember. She stood and came to me, concern perfectly arranged on her face. "Oh, sweetheart, it's okay. We'll go together tomorrow." "Thank you," I said, and I let her guide me to the couch like I was something fragile that needed protection. The performance had begun. My daughter arrived on a Saturday afternoon, and for the first time in 7 months, I understood what hope felt like. I'd spent 3 days perfecting the performance, asking Tanya where I'd put my reading glasses when they were on my head, pausing mid-sentence to search for words that came easily, shuffling slightly when I walked as if my balance had deteriorated further. She'd watched with satisfaction that she tried to mask as concern, and I'd watched her watching me, cataloging every micro-expression of pleasure. Then Meadow's car pulled into the driveway. Meadow Whitfield stepped out into the February afternoon, 38 years old. Tall, dark hair pulled back in the severe style she wore in courtrooms lawyers bearing, even in jeans and a sweater. She'd inherited her mother's eyes and my stubbornness, and right now both were focused on the front door where Tanya had appeared, with a smile too bright to be genuine. Meadow. What a wonderful surprise. Tanya came down the steps with arms extended. "How was the drive from Seattle?" "Not bad," Meadow said, accepting the hug with the right amount of warmth. "Just wanted to check in on Dad. Work's been slow, thought I'd take advantage." They walked into the house together, Tanya chattering about how glad she was to see Meadow, how I'd been doing so much better lately, how the new medication was really helping. Meadow and I looked at each other across the living room, everything unsaid passing in that glance. "Hi, Dad," she said. "Meadow." I let my voice carry just the right note of pleased confusion. "I didn't know you were coming. I texted Tanya yesterday. Maybe you forgot." "I probably did." I smiled the smile of someone who'd accepted his failing memory. "It's good to see you." Tanya made dinner. We ate like a normal family, passing dishes, asking about Meadow's cases in Seattle, discussing the rainy weather. Tanya was gracious, attentive, the perfect hostess. Meadow was casual, filial, checking in on her elderly father. And beneath it all, we were both acting. Tanya went to bed at 10:30, same as always. I waited until 11:15, watching the clock with the kind of attention I hadn't felt in 14 months. Then I walked quietly down the hall to the guest room where Meadow was staying. She was already awake, fully dressed, sitting on the bed with her laptop open. We went to the study. I closed the door and turned on the small desk lamp that cast the room in yellow shadows. "I need to show you everything," I said. I laid it out methodically the way I used to present architectural plans to skeptical clients. Sadie's diary opened to the entries about J photographs I'd taken of the files in the basement cabinet, Una Barton's Inez Dunn's mine, notes from the conversation I'd overheard transcribed while my memory was still clear, the timeline guardianship hearing scheduled for March 14th, 38 days from now. Meadow listened without interrupting. I watched her face go pale, watched her hands tighten on the edge of the desk, watched her lawyer's training keep her questions organized, even as her daughter's fear tried to break through. "How long have you known?" she asked when I finished. "Since January 27th, the night the pill fell into the bed gap and I didn't take it." "You've been pretending for," she calculated quickly, 8 days. 9 counting today. There's a specific kind of pain that comes from realizing your child tried to save you and you refused to listen. It's not guilt. It's not regret. It's the understanding that love tried to protect you and you called it interference. "I'm sorry," I said. "You tried to tell me. You told me I was paranoid." Her voice was steady but tight. "That I was jealous. That I couldn't accept you being happy." "I know." She nodded once sharp, accepting the apology without absolving me. Then she opened her laptop. "Dad, I hired someone 3 years ago to follow Tanya. I just didn't know how to tell you." She turned the screen toward me. Surveillance photographs, dozens of them. Tanya meeting Renee at cafes across Portland. Tanya entering a Wells Fargo bank branch I'd never heard of. Tanya at a legal office in Beaverton. Dates going back to 2018, 6 months after we'd married. 3 years, I said. "You've been watching her for 3 years while you pushed me away every time I tried to warn you." "Yes." Her voice broke slightly on the last word. "I had to watch you defend her. Watch you tell me I didn't understand. Watch you get weaker and I couldn't." She stopped, pressed her palms flat on the desk. "I have an investigator," she said. "Harlan Lockwood, former FBI. He's been building a file. I can call him tomorrow." "Monday," I said. "Not tomorrow. We need to keep this looking normal." She nodded. "Monday morning, I'll say I'm meeting an old friend for coffee, Pearl District somewhere she won't follow." Monday morning came cold and gray. Meadow told Tanya she was meeting a law school friend, would be back by lunch. I stayed home, performing my confusion, asking twice if Meadow had said when she'd return. The cafe was small corner table, away from windows. Harlan Lockwood was already there when I arrived separately 30 minutes after Meadow. 61 years old, calm demeanor, the kind of man who'd spent 20 years tracking financial predators and remained unimpressed by all of it. He placed a thin manila file on the table. "The woman's name is Renee Gallagher," he said without preamble. "This is her real background." I opened the file. California driver's license photo, 2015 different name Renee Morrison. Arizona, 2012, another name Rachel Gallagher. She's used 3 different names in 3 different states, Harlan continued. California, Arizona, Oregon, 2 previous fraud cases, 1 dismissed on technicality, 1 settled out of court for undisclosed amount. He slid another document across. Pharmacy degree from Universidad de Mexico City, dated 2009. I looked at the embossed seal, the official signatures. It's fake, Harlan said. The institution doesn't exist, never has. She printed this at a copy shop in Glendale, California in 2011. Fake degree, 14 months, every night. I stared at the document at the fraudulent credentials of a woman who'd mixed my medication for over a year, who'd calculated dosages, adjusted compounds, documented my decline with the authority of someone who'd supposedly studied pharmacology. She'd faked a degree to poison me more effectively. If she faked this, Meadows said quietly, what else has she faked? The performance began on a Tuesday morning when I deliberately forgot the word for coffee and watched my wife's eyes light up with satisfaction. If Renee had faked credentials to poison me more effectively, then every piece of their plan deserved scrutiny. But before I could dismantle it, I needed to become exactly what they needed me to be, a man too confused to fight back. February 7th. I came downstairs at 7:30. Tanya was in the kitchen making breakfast. I walked to the counter, looked at the coffee pot, and paused. The hot drink, I said. The morning thing. What's it called? Tanya turned spatula in hand. For just a second, something crossed her face. Not concern. Satisfaction. Coffee, darling, she said gently. Coffee, right. I nodded slowly. I knew that. She poured me a cup with practiced tenderness. Later that day, I heard her on the phone in the basement. The decline is accelerating. He couldn't remember the word coffee this morning. Over the next 3 days, I built the performance with precision. Wednesday, I asked what day it was, then asked again an hour later. Thursday, I reached for a glass and let my hand tremble visibly, nearly dropping it. Friday morning, I picked up the newspaper and called it the reading thing. Meadow watched from the background, playing her role perfectly. She showed appropriate concern. She offered gentle corrections. She exchanged looks with Tanya that said, I see it too. The most dangerous moment is when your opponent becomes confident. Wednesday morning, February 9th. Breakfast at the dining table. Meadow sat across from me, Tanya to my right. I ate my eggs slowly, then looked up at my daughter. Mabel, could you pass the salt? Meadow's face flickered just for a fraction of a second, the pain of hearing her father call her by the wrong name. Then her training took over. It's Meadow, Dad, she said carefully. I blinked. Meadow, I'm sorry, I knew that. Tanya reached over and squeezed my hand. It's okay, darling. She glanced at Meadow with an expression that said, see what I deal with. Meadow met the look with daughterly concern. Then for just a second, my daughter and I looked at each other across the table. Her eyes asked the question. Mine answered, it's working. If you've ever had to pretend to be less than you are to survive, you know the specific humiliation of calling your own daughter by the wrong name and watching strangers pity her for loving a man who can't remember her. Monday, February 8th. Routine medical appointment with Dr. Darren Faulkner. Providence Medical Building, 12th floor. Tanya drove me stayed in the reception area while I went into the examination room. Dr. Darren Faulkner, 57 years old. My private physician for 12 years sat on his rolling stool with the haunted look of a man who'd signed something he couldn't unsign 3 years ago and had been trapped ever since. He looked up from my chart with professional concern. How have you been feeling? Tanya mentioned some memory issues. I sat on the paper-covered table and let him check my blood pressure. Let him examine my eyes with the small light. Let him go through the routine. Then I waited until he turned to make notes. Darren, I said, voice completely clear, no tremor, look at me. He looked up and saw my eyes, sharp, focused, lucid. He froze. How long has it been? I asked quietly. How long has she kept that file of yours? The color drained from his face. I don't know what you're... Yes, you do. How long has she kept that file? He stared at me. The professional mask crumbled. Underneath was fear. How long... Silence. long enough that I could hear the reception desk printer through the wall could hear Tanya's voice asking about the next appointment. Finally, very softly, 3 years. I nodded. 3 years. The same timeline as Meadows' investigation. What's in the file? I asked. His hands shook. Prescription records. From 2015. I wrote pain medication prescriptions for a patient who didn't exist. Sold them. I needed money for my daughter's leukemia treatment insurance wouldn't. He stopped. It doesn't matter. I did it. Renee found out somehow. Fear makes people do terrible things, but fear also makes them predictable. And a predictable enemy is one you can turn. What did they ask you to do? I said. Sign competency reviews. Document your cognitive decline. Date them appropriately. Make it look progressive. His voice was barely audible. I'm so sorry. Is your daughter still alive? He looked up confused. What? Your daughter, the one who had leukemia. Yes, she's in remission. 3 years now. Good, I said. Then you still have something worth protecting. I leaned forward. I don't need you to do anything right now, Darren. Keep signing what they tell you to sign. Keep documenting my decline exactly as they expect. But you will have a chance to do the right thing. When that moment comes, don't run. He looked at me like a drowning man who'd just been thrown a rope. What if... The file will come out, I said. One way or another, what you did will become public. But there's a difference between being a conspirator in attempted murder and being a coerced participant who ultimately testified for the prosecution. Which one do you want to be? He nodded slowly. When the time comes, I said, you'll know. A knock on the door. Tanya's voice. Everything okay in there? Fine, Darren called out. Just finishing up. He looked at me. I let my shoulders slump, let my eyes go vague. Am I done? I asked, voice uncertain. Yes, he said quietly. You're done. I left the office shuffling slightly and Tanya took my arm with practiced concern. Behind us, I knew Dr. Darren Faulkner was sitting in his examination room, understanding that he'd just been offered something he hadn't had in 3 years a choice. Not between right and wrong, he'd already made that decision and lived with it. A choice between staying trapped or finding a way back. Between being the man who'd helped poison someone out of fear or the man who'd ultimately stopped it. I didn't know which he'd choose, but I knew that 32 days from now on March 14th, he'd have to decide. Meadow called me Friday night and asked a question I wasn't ready to answer. Dad, what do you do when you find someone who's been surviving by pretending to be insane for almost 4 years? Dr. Faulkner had been given a choice, but the previous victims, Una Barton and Inez Dunn, hadn't had that luxury. They'd been marked resolved in manila folders and forgotten. If they were still alive, they'd spent years with no one believing them, no one coming to help. Meadow and Harlan had gone to find them while I maintained the performance at home. Start from the beginning, I said into the phone. Cedar Grove Memory Care, Meadow said. We found her exactly where the file said she'd be chair by the window, same room she's been in since August 2017. And she was performing, completely convincing, unresponsive, vacant everything the staff expected to see. I could picture it. The institutional kindness, the quiet resignation, the assumption that this was just how some lives ended. Harlan waited by the door. Meadow continued. I sat beside her, took her hand. She didn't react at first, just kept staring out the window like I wasn't there. I waited. Then she checked the doorway, the corners, the window, looking for cameras. And her eyes, Dad, her eyes suddenly focused, sharp, completely lucid. She leaned close and whispered, How long did it take you to get here? I closed my own eyes. She's been faking, Meadow said. Since August 2017, almost 4 years. She told us, her voice caught slightly. She told us she's been pretending not to remember her own name so they wouldn't have a reason to move her somewhere worse or make her disappear entirely. Una Barton, 74 years old, a retired librarian with sharp eyes hidden behind a carefully maintained mask of dementia, sitting by a window at Cedar Grove Memory Care, surviving almost 4 years by pretending not to know who she was. How many days? I asked. She's counted. 1,387 days, every single one. If you've ever had to choose between fighting and surviving, There's a third option. Pretend to surrender while you wait for someone stronger to arrive. What did she say when you asked if she wanted to leave? Only if I can testify in court, Meadow said. Direct quote. Her voice was completely steady, fierce. She wants them in prison more than she wants to be free. I understood that. I understood it completely. And the second woman Inez done? Sunday morning, Harlan found an address in Beaverton, small house granddaughter's name on the property records. We knocked, saw the curtain move, waited. Finally, the door opened chain, still on just a crack. Inez Dunn, 71 years old, short gray hair, alert eyes. She checked the street behind us before she'd even say hello. She let you in. Eventually, after Harlan showed his credentials, after I showed my bar license, after she verified both online while we stood on the porch. Meadow paused. She hasn't left that house in almost 2 years, Dad. Not once. Her granddaughter brings groceries. She stays inside because she's terrified they'll find her and finish what they started. 2 women, 2 different survival strategies, both still breathing, both still waiting. What did they take from her? I asked. Everything. Meadow's voice went cold. She showed us documents she's kept in a manila envelope in her dresser drawer. Real estate transfer contract dated March 2019. Her signature, but she says she was drugged when she signed it. Property valued at $2.1 million. They sold it for $340,000. I felt the number land like a physical blow. Buyer, Delaware LLC. Harlan's already started tracing it. And there's a doctor's note certifying her as mentally incapacitated, signed by someone whose license was suspended 6 months before the date on the document. $2.1 million, sold for $340,000, 1 signature, 1 forged doctor's note, gone. She said she knows them. Meadow continued. Renee Gallagher, Tanya Whitfield, she used those exact names. She tried to report it went to the police, tried to hire a lawyer, but the paperwork all said she was insane, incapacitated, suffering from paranoid delusions, so nobody believed her. I stood at the window of the study looking out at the garden where Tanya had stood on her phone, discussing my timeline like I was a project to be managed. 2 years, I said. Inez has been hiding in her granddaughter's house for 2 years. Waiting, Meadow said. Both of them are waiting. Una in her nursing home chair, pretending to be vacant. Inez in Beaverton, too scared to step outside, both waiting for someone official who might actually believe them, someone who could stand up first. What did you tell them? The truth. That you're the third target. That we have 30 days. That we're building a case. That we need them to testify. And Una said yes immediately. Inez needed time. She's scared Dad, really scared, but eventually she nodded. She pulled out that crumpled contract and said, I've been keeping this for someone who would listen. I guess that's you. I thought about 3 manila folders in a basement filing cabinet. 3 lives marked resolved. 3 people who were supposed to be silenced, incapacitated, disappeared. But Una Barton had survived by feigning madness for 1,387 days in a nursing home, counting every one waiting for someone to believe her. Inez Dunn had survived by hiding in her granddaughter's house for nearly 2 years, holding on to a crumpled contract that proved she'd lost everything. And I had survived by pretending to forget the word for coffee while secretly reading their files and planning their destruction. 3 people who were supposed to be finished. 3 people who refused to disappear. Meadow. I said, tell them we're going to stand up together. Tell them 30 days from now on March 14th, we're going to walk into that hearing room and show everyone exactly what resolved looks like when it fights back. I already did, she said quietly. Una smiled. First time the staff has seen her smile in 4 years. They thought it was a miracle. It wasn't a miracle. It was 2 women who'd been waiting for someone brave enough to stand up first. And I was about to give them what they'd been waiting for. Sometimes the people you pay to protect your house are the ones who end up protecting you in ways you never asked for. Una and Inez had survived by waiting for someone to stand up first, But while I'd been performing confusion and gathering allies, someone else in the Victorian mansion had been documenting everything in silence. Monday, February 13th. Tanya had a meeting downtown. I waited until her car turned the corner, then found Simone Delaney in the kitchen washing dishes. Simone had worked in the house for 9 years, 45 years old, quiet efficiency, the kind of housekeeper who knew where everything belonged and never asked questions she didn't need answered. She'd been there when Sadie was alive. She'd stayed after Tanya arrived. I approached carefully. "Simone," I said quietly, "the camera you installed last year, is it still working?" She stopped, hands frozen in the soapy water, didn't turn around. "Yes," she said, voice very low, "and I have 11 months of footage." I waited. She turned slowly, drying her hands on a towel. Her eyes were red. "I know I shouldn't take their money," she said. "I know I should have said something sooner, but I didn't know what to do. I've worked here 9 years. I love this house. I love—" She stopped. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. "Show me," I said. She pulled out her phone, hands shaking slightly. Pulled up an app I didn't recognize. "Encrypted cloud storage," she explained. "Backed up automatically." She'd installed the camera in the basement last February, hidden it behind boxes of old Christmas decorations, where no one would think to look. How many times, I asked. 47, she said, in 11 months, always between 1 and 3 in the morning. She showed me timestamps, dates Renee Gallagher entering through the basement side door with her own key. Sometimes carrying a small leather bag, sometimes empty-handed, always staying less than 20 minutes. And once, Simone's voice dropped to a whisper. "She changed the medication in your organizer. November 2020. I recorded it." She showed me the footage, grainy but clear enough. Renee standing at the small table where my weekly pills were arranged, switching pills from one compartment to another, checking her watch, replacing the lid carefully. Caught on camera, irrefutable. Loyalty isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a woman installing cameras without telling anyone, documenting crimes for 11 months, waiting for the moment when silence becomes testimony. 47 times, I said. "And you recorded it all. You waited for this moment in silence just like I did." "I didn't know what else to do," she whispered. "I just knew something was wrong, and I knew if I said anything too soon, they'd make me disappear too." "You did exactly right," I said. "And when the time comes, you'll testify." She nodded once, firm. "I will." 2 days later, Tuesday, February 15th, Valentine's Day +1, Tanya gave me a gift. The dining room had candles, soft music. She'd made reservations at our favorite restaurant but canceled them, saying I seemed too tired to go out. Instead, she'd cooked at home, set the table with Sadie's good china that I noticed she'd started using without asking. After dinner, she presented a red velvet box. "I wanted to get you something special," she said, "to show you I'm always here." Inside, a Patek Philippe watch, rose gold leather band, the kind of timepiece that costs more than most people make in 6 months. I opened the box with trembling hands, partly real emotion, partly performance. "It's beautiful," I said. "Thank you." She watched me closely, eyes tracking the tremor in my fingers, observing my breathing, checking my pupils like Dr. Faulkner did during examinations. The watch wasn't love, it was surveillance. $18,500, she said softly. "I wanted you to know how much you mean to me." I'd checked the joint account that morning, down $23,000 from last month, various purchases, various transfers. The watch was just one line item. Gifts are just objects until you understand their purpose. This watch wasn't love. It was a timer. Friday, February 17th, 3 days later, Tanya's son came to visit. Jude Gallagher arrived in an expensive suit, Italian cut slightly too tight in the shoulders, like he'd bought it to impress someone rather than for comfort. 32 years old, Tanya's son from her previous marriage, with a calculating smile and shoes that cost more than they should. Tanya greeted him warmly at the door. "Darling, come in, come in. I want you to meet my husband properly." She led him to the living room where I sat in the wing-back chair by the window playing my role. "Jude, this is my husband. Sweetheart, this is my son, Jude." We shook hands. His grip was firm, but his eyes were already moving, appraising the furniture, the paintings, the grandfather clock in the corner. "My mother's told me so much about you," he said. "She's very worried. She just wants to make sure you're well taken care of." The words were rehearsed, smooth, but there was something underneath a hunger that wasn't quite greed, more like someone seeking approval. Tanya went to the kitchen to prepare tea. The moment she left, Jude settled into the chair across from me, and I saw his eyes catalog the room with professional efficiency. "What do you do, Jude?" I asked, letting my voice carry just the right amount of elderly politeness. "I'm managing some investments," he said. Pause. "Yours?" I asked. Longer pause. "Family investments," he said finally. The hesitation said everything. Not his investments, not his decisions, not his future. Family investments. I recognized the look in his eyes because I'd seen it before in young architects, desperate to prove themselves in sons trying to earn fathers' respect in people who'd built their identity around someone else's approval. Jude Gallagher was performing too, just like I was, just like Simone had been for 11 months. The difference was he didn't know his mother had already written him out of the script. He didn't know about the fake passports, the plane tickets, the exit plan that included Tanya and Renee, but not him. He thought he was building a future. He didn't realize he was just another tool to be discarded when the job was done. I watched him leave that afternoon expensive suit that didn't quite fit Wright's smile that wanted to be warm, but didn't know how walking to a car that probably cost more than he could actually afford on whatever allowance Tanya gave him from the family investments. And I understood in 17 days on March 14th, Jude Gallagher would discover exactly how expendable his mother considered him. The question was whether that discovery would happen in time for him to choose the right side. Some secrets wait 4 years to be spoken, held by witnesses who didn't know what they were witnessing until someone finally asks the right question. Jude would discover his expendability in 17 days. But first, I needed to understand how long they'd been doing this, whether I was the second target or the 20th. And that meant going back to where it started, back to Sadie. Sunday, February 19th. After morning service at First Presbyterian Church, I waited until most of the congregation had left. Then I walked to the small office behind the sanctuary where Reverend Spencer Hewitt sat at his desk, reading glasses pushed into silver hair that had been dark brown when Sadie and I first attended his church. Spencer Hewitt, 70 years old, had practiced law for 20 years before converting to ministry. He'd presided over Sadie's funeral. He'd watched me grieve for 11 months. He'd witnessed my remarriage to Tanya with what I now recognized as careful reservation. He looked up when I closed the door. Not surprised to see me, almost expectant. "Leland," he said quietly. I sat in the chair across from his desk. "Paul?" I said, using the name he preferred from friends. "Do you remember Sadie's funeral 4 years ago? Was there anything wrong?" He removed his glasses slowly, looked out the window at the gray Portland morning. Long silence. "I've been waiting for you to ask this question for 4 years, he said finally. He opened his desk drawer, pulled out a manila envelope worn at the edges like it had been handled many times, opened it carefully. Inside a handwritten note on church stationery, dated December 2016. "I took notes," he said. "It seemed wrong at the time, and I thought I hoped I was imagining things, but I was a lawyer for 20 years before I converted to ministry. I learned to trust my instincts about people." He slid the note across the desk. I read his careful handwriting. A stranger stood beside Sadie's coffin during the viewing, introduced themselves as a family friend from her art circle. Leland didn't seem to recognize them. They were crying, face performing all the right movements of grief, but the eyes weren't crying. I know the difference. I spent 2 decades watching witnesses lie on the stand. This person was performing sorrow while their eyes calculated something else. Loss, maybe, but not grief. The kind of loss an accountant feels when reviewing bad numbers. My hands shook. Not performance this time, real. "Who was it?" I asked. "I don't know. I never saw them again. Medium height, dark hair, professional clothes. I couldn't tell you more than that. But I remember the eyes." He paused. "When you remarried, I wanted to say something. But what was I going to say Someone stood by your wife's coffin and cried wrong, and you would have thought I was interfering. You were right, I said, about everything. If someone you love died 4 years ago and you're only now discovering they were murdered, the grief doesn't come back fresh. It comes back with interest, compounded by every day you didn't know. What changed? Spencer asked quietly. I stopped taking the pills, I said. He nodded like that explained everything. Monday, February 20th, morning. I sat in my Volvo in a Fred Meyer parking lot 15 miles from the Victorian mansion. Rain drummed on the roof. The burner phone Meadow had given me buzzed Harlan's encrypted call. I found something, he said without preamble. Cayman Islands account. I waited. In Sadie Whitfield's name. My hand tightened on the steering wheel. Opened September 2016. Harlan continued. 3 months before she died. Balance was $890,000. The rain got louder, or maybe that was my pulse. Last transaction, November 2016, he said. 1 month before the accident. Full withdrawal. Wire transfer to a Delaware LLC. I stared at the rain-streaked windshield. Did the math. Sadie died December 2016. Someone opened an offshore account in her name 3 months earlier, moved nearly $1 million, withdrew it all 1 month before her death. I never knew about that account, I said. I know. Sadie never mentioned it, never opened it, never accessed it. I know. $890,000, 3 months before death, withdrawn, gone. Murder doesn't always look like violence. Who could have opened an account in her name? I asked. Someone with her full identification documents, social security number, driver's license, birth certificate. Or, he paused, someone skilled at forgery. Renee Gallagher, fake pharmacy degree from a copy shop in Glendale, California. The Delaware LLC, I said. Can you trace it? Working on it. Multiple layers. Shell companies inside shell companies. But I'll find the end. I looked out at the February rain at the ordinary people going in and out of the supermarket with ordinary problems. Grocery lists, work schedules, lives that didn't include discovering your wife was murdered 4 years ago by people who are now trying to kill you the same way. Harlan, I said, voice flat. I need you to reinvestigate my wife's car accident. Already started, he said. I pulled the original police report Saturday. Brake failure, wet road, single-car accident. But here's what's interesting. The investigator noted unusual brake line wear pattern, but didn't follow up because there was no reason to suspect foul play. No life insurance payout, no contentious divorce, just a widow and a daughter grieving. Can you prove it was tampered with? Not after 4 years. But I can prove the account was opened in her name without her knowledge. I can prove the money was moved. I can create reasonable doubt that her death was convenient timing. I sat in that parking lot in the rain phone pressed to my ear, understanding what I should have understood 4 years ago. Someone had opened a Cayman Islands account in my wife's name 3 months before she died, moved $890,000 through it, withdrew everything 1 month before her brakes failed on a wet December road. Her husband of 30 years, knew nothing about that account, which meant someone else did. And that someone had been planning her death long enough to move nearly $1 million offshore first. The question was no longer if they killed Sadie. The question was how many others they'd practiced on first. The day I realized they were hunting my neighbor was the day my deadline changed from abstract to immediate. How many others had they practiced on before Sadie? The question haunted me for less than 24 hours before I got my answer. Not in a file. Not in an investigation, over the garden fence. Tuesday, February 21st. Late morning, I was in the garden pretending to tend roses that didn't need tending, part of the performance, the confused old man puttering aimlessly, when Doris Travers called over the fence. Doris. 72 years old, cheerful widow, my neighbor for 15 years. Her husband had been a successful commercial real estate developer. She'd inherited well. Estimated estate $4 to $5 million. Good morning, she called, waving. Lovely day, isn't it? It is, I said, walking over. How are you, Doris? Wonderful your wife introduced me to a very good friend yesterday. Renee something. She advises seniors on finances. My hand tightened on the garden shears. We met for coffee, Doris continued, oblivious. Pearl District, such a lovely woman, very knowledgeable. She offered to help me review my portfolio. Isn't that thoughtful? Very thoughtful, I said carefully. When are you meeting her again? Next week. She wants to review my trust documents, make sure everything's structured properly for tax purposes. I looked at Doris, kind smile, trusting eyes. No idea she was describing a predator who'd already stripped 2 other women of everything they owned and was currently poisoning me. That sounds helpful, I managed. After she went inside, I stood there understanding what I should have seen immediately. Renee Gallagher hadn't approached Doris by chance. This was deliberate, calculated. They were preparing Plan B. If the scheme with me failed or ended early, Doris was the backup target. The deadline was no longer just March 14th. It was before Doris invited Renee deeper into her financial life. Days, maybe a week. If someone you love is being circled by predators and doesn't know it, every conversation becomes a calculation. Warn them and risk the predators fleeing, or stay quiet and build your case while they remain in danger. I couldn't warn Doris, not yet. But I could give Tanya and Renee something else to focus on, something bigger. Something that would make them forget about my neighbor and concentrate all their attention back on me. Before I tell you what I did at that dinner table, are you still with me? Comment A if you think this was risky, or B if it was necessary, and add one short reason. Because this is where I stopped being the victim. Please note, some details ahead are dramatized for storytelling. Wednesday, February 22nd evening, the Victorian Mansion dining room. Tanya had prepared roast chicken she'd been cooking more lately, playing the devoted wife with increasing dedication as my supposed decline accelerated. Meadow was visiting from Seattle again, maintaining the facade of the concerned daughter checking in on her ailing father. I sat at the head of the table, Meadow to my right, Tanya to my left, candles flickering between us. The performance of a normal family dinner. "This chicken is perfect, Tanya," I said. "Thank you." "Of course, darling," she smiled warmly. "I want to take care of you." I ate slowly, deliberately, letting my hand tremble slightly as I reached for the water glass. Then, as if the thought had just occurred to me, I was going through some old documents yesterday in the study. Found paperwork for a special trust fund Sadie set up years ago. Meadow's fork paused midway to her mouth. We'd planned this. She knew what was coming. But she played her role perfectly, mild curiosity, nothing more. "A trust fund," Tanya asked, voice carefully neutral. "For charitable projects," I continued. "Something about supporting arts education. She was always passionate about that. The documents say it's about $3.2 million. I watched Tanya's eyes. For just half a second, they lit up. Pure, undisguised calculation. Then she controlled her expression, smoothed it into gentle concern. But I'd seen it. And across the table, I saw Meadow see it too. "I didn't know about that," Tanya said. "That's wonderful that Sadie planned ahead like that. The interesting part," I said, playing my role as the confused man stumbling across forgotten details, "is that it can only be accessed by the person specifically designated in her will. Turns out, that's me. I'm the only one who can authorize transfers or changes." The detail was true. The fund existed. Sadie had set it up 12 years ago, but Tanya didn't know about it. It wasn't in any of the financial documents she'd reviewed. It wasn't part of the assets she'd been systematically planning to seize. And now I'd just told her it existed. $3.2 million she hadn't known about. $3.2 million I could access. $3.2 million that would require my signature, my authorization, my cooperation. There's a specific satisfaction that comes from watching someone who thinks they're hunting. You take bait you've deliberately laid. "How wonderful," Tanya said. "Sadie would be so proud that you're honoring her wishes." "I thought so too," I said. After dinner, Tanya cleared dishes. Meadow excused herself to the bathroom. My phone buzzed text from her. "What did you just do, Dad?" I replied, "Deployed the bait. They'll change their plans now, and when they change their plans, they'll have to reveal more." I sat in my study that night, door closed, phone screen dark. For 14 months, Tanya and Renee had controlled every variable: the medication, the dosage, the timeline, the perception of my decline. They'd chosen when to start, how fast to escalate, when to end it. Tonight, I had introduced a new variable they hadn't planned for $3.2 million. They didn't know existed and now desperately wanted. And when people get greedy, they get sloppy. I had 21 days until the guardianship hearing. 21 days to document everything, gather witnesses, build an unbreakable case. But tonight, for the first time in 14 months, I wasn't waiting for them to make the next move. I just lit a fire to see who would burn. What breaks a son's loyalty to his mother? Not cruelty, sons endure that. Not lies, sons rationalize those. What breaks loyalty is the cold mathematics of exclusion. 2 passports, 2 tickets, 0 explanations. I'd lit a fire to see who would burn. 24 hours later, I got my answer, but it came from a direction I hadn't expected. Meadow called Thursday night, February 23rd, voice tight. "Jude just texted me," she said. "He wants to meet tomorrow morning, says it's urgent, says he found something." "Where?" "Pearl District Cafe, 10 a.m. He specifically asked for both of us." I sat in the dark study phone pressed to my ear, trying to calculate what had changed. The trust fund bait had been deployed less than 48 hours ago. Had Tanya already told Jude? Was this a trap? "What do you think?" Meadow asked. "I think we meet him," I said, "in public, and we see what he has to say." What I didn't know, what I wouldn't know until the next morning, was what had happened in Tanya's bedroom that Thursday evening while she was out meeting Renee. Jude had gone looking for his phone charger. He'd left it there 2 days earlier, still plugged into the outlet near Tanya's dressing table. The bedroom was empty. Tanya was at a restaurant downtown, wouldn't be back for hours. He found the charger, started to leave, then noticed the dressing table drawer was slightly ajar, not much, just enough to catch his eye. Inside 2 U.S. passports. One in Tanya Whitfield's name, her real passport, the one she used for legitimate travel. The other in the name Margaret Owen photo of Tanya, but different details, different birth date. And beside them, one Canadian passport, also under the name Margaret Owen. Beneath the passports, 2 plane tickets. Vancouver to Zurich, departure date March 16th. 2 days after the guardianship hearing. 2 tickets, 2 passports under the name Margaret Owen. No ticket bearing the name Jude Gallagher. He told me later that he stood there for a full minute trying to make it make sense, trying to find the explanation where his mother had a good reason for fake passports and plane tickets that didn't include him. Then he pulled out his phone and photographed everything. The laptop was still open on the desk, Tanya's personal laptop, the one she thought was secure. He shouldn't have looked. But once you've found fake passports, boundaries stop mattering. Email open. Thread between Tanya and Renee. He scrolled. Most of it was code he didn't fully understand. References to timeline and documentation and transfer procedures. But one email dated February 20th, 3 days ago, was clear enough. "What about Jay? He's been asking questions about the trust structure." Renee's reply, "Jay's usefulness will expire after the hearing concludes. No provisions necessary beyond that point." He photographed that too. You spend 32 years being someone's son. You think that means something permanent. Then you find 2 plane tickets and realize you were always just inventory useful until the expiration date printed on an email. Friday morning, 10 a.m. The cafe was small corner location windows overlooking a quiet street. I arrived first. Meadow 5 minutes later. Jude 10 minutes after that. He looked different than he had a week ago. The expensive suit was the same. The shoes were the same. But something in his face had changed. The performance was gone, replaced by something rawer. He sat down across from us. Didn't order coffee, just pulled out his phone. "I found these last night," he said quietly, "in my mother's bedroom." He showed us the photographs, 3 passports, 2 tickets, the emails. Meadow's lawyer training took over immediately. "Did you take the physical documents?" "No, just photographed them. She doesn't know I saw." "Good," Meadow said. "That means the evidence is still in place, undisturbed." Jude looked at me. "She's been using me. For how long? I don't know," I said honestly. "But I know you're not the only one." I told him about Una Barton, about Inez Dunn, about Sadie's diary and the stranger at her funeral, and the offshore account opened in her name, about 14 months of pills that made me forget my own daughter's name. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he nodded slowly. "What do you need from me?" he asked. "Send the photos to Meadows' encrypted email," she said. "Then delete them from your phone and your cloud backup. We'll preserve them as evidence, but you need plausible deniability if your mother checks your devices. And then, pretend you never saw any of it," I said. "Go back to being the son she thinks you are, the one who asks about family investments and wears expensive suits and doesn't ask too many questions." "For how long?" 18 days, Meadow said, "until March 14th. He looked down at his phone at the photographs of his mother's escape plan that didn't include him. "She's really going to leave," he said quietly. "Leave the country. Leave everything. Leave me." "Yes," I said. "And you're going to stop her?" "Yes." He nodded, sent the files to Meadows' email, deleted them from his phone while we watched, then looked up. "Good," he said. After he left Meadow and I sat in that cafe going through the inventory of everything we'd gathered, 11 months of camera footage from Simone showing Renee entering the basement 47 times, medication records documenting progressive poisoning, Una Barton and Inez Dunn, 2 previous victims willing to testify, Dr. Faulkner willing to confess his coerced participation, fake passports proving identity fraud, plane tickets to Zurich proving premeditated flight, emails proving conspiracy. 18 days. Everything in place except the one thing that would make it impossible for them to claim accident or coincidence. "We're still missing something," I said. Meadow nodded. "Physical evidence. The actual poison. Without that, they can claim the medication records are wrong. The camera footage shows legitimate medical care. The whole thing is a misunderstanding." "We need proof of deliberate intent," I said. "We need the poison itself," she agreed. I looked out the cafe window at the gray Portland morning and understood what we were really saying. We had 11 months of documentation. We had witnesses. We had flight records and fake identities and offshore accounts. But we didn't have the one thing that would prove beyond any doubt that Tanya and Renee had been systematically poisoning me for 14 months. We needed the pills themselves, analyzed, tested, proven to contain something that shouldn't be there, and I had 18 days to figure out how to get them. I signed the exhumation consent form for my first wife's body on a Monday morning, without telling my second wife, the woman who likely killed her. We needed physical proof of the poison. 18 days to get it. The answer came from Meadow on Friday afternoon, 4 hours after we'd left the cafe, still cataloging everything we had and everything we lacked. "Harlan's contact at the Oregon State Medical Examiner's office," she said. "If arsenic was used consistently before Sadie's death, bone and tissue samples will still show elevated concentrations, even after 4 years. "Exhumation," I said. "Yes." Monday, February 27th, morning. Meadow arrived at the Victorian mansion with the consent form while Tanya was at her regular yoga class, the Monday routine I'd memorized over 14 months. We sat in the study. The form was simple, clinical. A supporting declaration for federal investigators confirming my reasonable cause to believe Sadie Marie Whitfield's death in December 2016 was not accidental, and requesting forensic examination of her remains at Rose City Cemetery. "Agent Morrison has agreed to file for a federal court order," Meadow said. "For a homicide investigation, the FBI can request exhumation through the federal prosecutor's office without notifying other family members." "What about Tanya?" I asked. "She's my current wife. She'll find out." "Not until after it's done. The order is sealed pending investigation. But Morrison needs you to sign a supporting declaration, your statement as surviving spouse of the original marriage, confirming you have reasonable cause to suspect foul play. Your signature doesn't authorize the exhumation. It strengthens the federal application." I looked at the form, at Sadie's name typed in black ink. "When will they do it?" I asked. "March 7th, Wednesday, 13 days before the hearing." I signed. My hand was steady. No tremor. No performance this time. Just my name on a line that would let medical examiners dig up my first wife to prove my second wife had murdered her. Meadow witnessed the signature dated. It sealed it in an envelope. "Once this is filed," she said quietly, "there's no going back." "Good," I said. That afternoon, Harlan called. I was in the garden again, the performance the confused old man tending roses, but Tanya was inside preparing dinner. I walked to the far corner where the fence line met the property edge phone pressed to my ear. "I've been watching Renee," Harlan said without preamble. 3 days of surveillance. You need to hear this." "Go ahead." She transferred $340,000 to a separate offshore account. Different shell company than the one she shares with Tanya. Different bank, different beneficiary structure. I felt something shift in my chest. Not quite satisfaction, more like recognition. "She's running ahead," Harlan continued. "She's taken her share and she's about to leave your wife behind. Does Tanya know?" "Not yet, but she will when she tries to access the joint account and realizes it's lighter than it should be." "What else?" "Renee contacted a private immigration lawyer in Vancouver, not the attorney they've been using together, a specialist in Canadian residency applications. She's building an exit that doesn't include Tanya." Partnerships built on murder have the structural integrity of wet paper they hold until the first person tries to save themselves. "Thank you," I said. "Do you want me to tell Tanya?" "No," I said immediately. "Not yet." That evening, after Tanya went to bed, Meadow and I sat in the study with the door closed. "Harlan found evidence Renee's betraying Tanya," I said. "Separate account, separate lawyer, separate exit plan." Meadow considered this. "If we tell Tanya now, she might panic, cut a deal to save herself, testify against Renee in exchange for reduced charges, or she might accelerate the timeline." I said, "Try to complete the guardianship before Renee can run." "Either way, we lose control." I looked out the study window at the dark garden at the roses I'd been pretending to tend. "Let Renee run," I said finally. "Let Tanya think they're still partners. Fractured conspiracies make better evidence. When they turn on each other, we'll have both their testimonies contradicting each other. Prosecutors love that." Meadow smiled slightly. "You're thinking like an investigator now." "I've had good teachers," I said. Saturday, March 1st, U.S. Bancorp Tower, downtown Portland. 27th floor, the office of Thomas Bradford, criminal defense attorney. Bradford was in his late 50s with 30 years of federal prosecution experience before switching to defense work. He sat behind a mahogany desk reviewing the evidence we'd brought with the methodical precision of someone who'd seen every variation of human cruelty and remained unimpressed by it. Meadow had arranged the meeting. "He's the best," she'd said. "If this is going federal, we need someone who knows that system." I'd brought everything, printed, organized, indexed. 11 months of Simone's camera footage condensed to key timestamps. Medication records showing progressive dosage increases. Una Barton and Inez Dunn's witness statements. Dr. Faulkner's confession recorded and notarized. Fake passports photographed by Jude. Plane tickets to Zurich for March 16th. Email threads discussing my usefulness and timeline. Reverend Spencer's notes from Sadie's funeral. Sadie's offshore account records. Bradford read through it all in silence. 40 minutes without speaking. When he finally looked up, his expression hadn't changed. "This isn't just a divorce," he said. "This is attempted murder through systematic poisoning, financial fraud, falsified medical records, identity theft, interstate wire fraud, and possibly, he tapped Sadie's account records, homicide investigation into your first wife's death. You spend a year gathering evidence thinking you're building a divorce case. Then an attorney says one word and everything changes. FBI. FBI, I said. Interstate wire fraud conspiracy homicide investigation across state lines, Bradford said. This falls under federal jurisdiction. I need to contact them. When Meadow asked, "Now," but he held up one hand. "No one moves until March 14th. The guardianship hearing happens. They make their play. We document everything. Then the FBI steps in with federal warrants." "Why wait?" I asked. "Because right now we have evidence of conspiracy. After March 14th, when they try to seize your assets under fraudulent guardianship, we have evidence of completed fraud. attempted crime versus completed crime. The sentencing guidelines are very different. He closed the file folder. Mr. Whitfield, when this goes to trial, and it will go to trial, you want them convicted of everything they did, not just everything they plan to do. We wait until they finish, then we end them. I sat in that office on the 27th floor and understood what I should have understood when I first heard voices in the basement. This was never going to end with a divorce. FBI. I didn't expect that word when I was lying on the floor without taking the pill on the night of January 27th. But this isn't just about me anymore. Sadie deserves to know the truth. And in 13 days on March 7th, we'd have the proof. 7 days until the hearing, and my first wife's body was being lifted from the ground while my second wife prepared a pill I had never seen before. Meadows' text arrived at 6:43 Wednesday morning, exhumation team on site. Agent Morrison supervising. Will update when they're finished. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. Somewhere across town, hydraulic lifts were breaking through frozen March soil. Men in protective gear were opening Sadie's casket, taking samples, looking for what I already knew they'd find: the same slow poison that had been flowing through my veins for 14 months. The bedroom door opened. Tanya entered with my morning tray. "You're up early," she said, her eyes moving to my phone. "Everything all right?" "Couldn't sleep." I deleted Meadows' text before setting the phone down. "Old man problems." She smiled, but her gaze lingered on my hands, checking for tremors, evaluating my cognitive state. Every morning now was an assessment data collection for the hearing 7 days away. "Your medications." She arranged 3 cups on the nightstand, blue capsules, white tablets, the clear gel cap that had replaced the original pills 6 weeks ago. I took them while she watched, washing them down with cranberry juice. My performance had evolved over 11 days, just enough hesitation to suggest confusion, not enough to trigger intervention. The delicate balance of a man in decline. Tanya collected the empty cups. "Mrs. Gallagher wants to review some paperwork this afternoon. Financial arrangements for your ongoing care." More paperwork. "Legal requirements." She smoothed the bedspread. "She's very thorough about documentation." I bet she was. Every signature, another brick in the fortress around my estate. Every document, another layer of legal protection when the poison finally did its work, if I let it. The surveillance intensified after breakfast. Tanya's morning routine had always included basic observation medication, compliance, meal intake, mobility assessment. But Wednesday morning, she added variables. She appeared in the library at 9:15 while I read the Tribune. "Just checking your hydration, Mr. Sterling." She arrived in the sunroom at 10:30 with questions about lunch. At 11:15, she knocked on the study door to ask about afternoon activities. 6 visits in 4 hours, double her usual frequency. I maintained the performance mild confusion about which book I'd been reading, uncertainty about whether I'd already eaten. The exact level of impairment we'd established over the past week and a half, consistent deterioration. But Tanya's increased presence had purpose beyond assessment. She was tightening the perimeter, making sure I stayed in sight, cutting off opportunities for unsupervised phone calls or meetings. They were worried. The exhumation had shifted something in their timeline, accelerated their schedule. I felt it in the weight of Tanya's attention, in the way she positioned herself between me and the front door, in how she'd started appearing before I could fully close a room's entrance. 7 days until the hearing, but they weren't waiting 7 days anymore. The new pill appeared at 2:30 p.m. Tanya entered the study with my afternoon dose, the familiar clear gel cap and white tablet. But she'd added a third medication, pale yellow, oblong, unmarked. "Dr. Faulkner called in an adjustment," she said, holding out the paper cup. "This will help with the agitation you've been experiencing." I hadn't been experiencing agitation. My chart showed stable mood, appropriate effect, no behavioral concerns, beyond the manufactured confusion. This wasn't a therapeutic intervention. This was something else. "What is it?" I asked, using my best elderly patient voice, querulous, uncertain. "An anti-anxiety medication." Tanya's smile was warm, professional, utterly false. Very gentle. "You'll barely notice any effects." I looked at the pale yellow pill. Unmarked meant compounded. Compounded meant custom dosage. Custom dosage meant untraceable. My phone vibrated in my pocket. Meadows' ringtone 3 short pulses that meant urgent. I should use the bathroom first, I said, standing slowly. Tanya's hand moved to my elbow. Of course, I'll wait here. She'd never waited before, never supervised bathroom trips, but today she was making sure I didn't flush any medications or make any phone calls. I took my time in the bathroom, checking Meadows' message, preliminary results positive for oleander toxin. Morrison requesting arrest warrant. Stay away from all medications until we extract you. Too late for that. I'd been taking poisons for 14 months, but this pale yellow pill was different, a new variable introduced 12 days before a hearing that would seal my fate. I deleted the text and flushed the toilet. Tanya was exactly where I'd left her, the paper cup still in her hand. "Ready?" she asked. I took the pills, all 3. Swallowed them while she watched because she was watching, standing close enough to see my throat move close enough to know if I palmed anything. The pale yellow one tasted bitter, despite the coating metallic chemical wrong. Meadows' warning burned in my chest, but refusing the medication now with Tanya's eyes on me would end the performance 48 hours too soon. Good, Tanya collected the cup. Why don't you rest for a while? You've had a busy morning. I hadn't had a busy morning. I'd read the paper and pretended to be confused about lunch. But I let her guide me toward the bedroom, shuffling like a man twice my 86 years, while the new medication dissolved in my stomach and began whatever work Renee Gallagher had designed it to do. 4 hours later, I heard them through the garden intercom. The system was supposed to be inactive. Jude had disabled the outdoor speakers back in January, but he'd left the receiving unit in the study functional, hidden behind the bookshelf where I sometimes monitored the garden pavilion. Where Renee and Tanya were having a conversation they thought no one could hear. Moving too slowly, Renee's voice carried clearly through the speaker. The exhumation changes everything. The new compound will accelerate the timeline. Tanya's clinical tone. Combined with his existing toxicity levels, we're looking at progressive organ failure within 96 hours. Not good enough. If the FBI gets involved before the hearing, they won't. Morrison's working through local PD. Warrant requests take time. Time we don't have. Movement fabric rustling. Renee pacing. The daughter's been too quiet. The attorney's too confident. Something's wrong. Silence, then Tanya. What do you want to do? There's another option. Renee's voice dropped lower, forcing me to turn up the volume. Immediate, clean, makes everything else irrelevant. You mean... we stop waiting for chemistry to do our work. We stop gambling on hearing dates and legal proceedings. We handle it ourselves before anyone can interfere. Another pause, longer. When, Tanya asked, Friday night, after the evening dose, while he's already compromised from the new compound, natural progression of his existing decline. That's only 5 days, I know, but it's enough. The intercom went silent. I stood in the study's shadows, the pale yellow pill already working in my bloodstream, and understood exactly what Renee Gallagher meant by another option. Not slow poisoning over 14 months, not controlled deterioration until a trial date. Something immediate, something final. And I had 5 days. The medical examiner found arsenic concentrations in my first wife's bone tissue 14 times higher than environmental exposure proof that Sadie didn't die of natural causes. Meadow brought the report Saturday morning, March 10th. 5 days after I'd heard Renee plan my immediate murder through the garden intercom. 3 days before the hearing that would either lock me away or set me free. 14 times environmental baseline, so was. Meadow said, her finger tracing the highlighted passage. Consistent with chronic poisoning over 12 to 14 months before death in December 2016. I looked at the numbers, arsenic parts per million in bone tissue concentrations that couldn't happen naturally, couldn't happen accidentally. Evidence that my first wife had been murdered using the same method my second wife had been using on me for 14 months. So she killed Sadie the same way she's trying to kill me. Yes. Meadow set the report on my desk. We have proof now, not just conspiracy. Murder. Murder. The word sat heavy in the study's afternoon light. Sadie hadn't died of heart failure at 68. She'd been poisoned. slowly, methodically, by a woman who'd probably been planning it since the day Tanya arrived as her hospice nurse in early 2015. The same timeline, the same pattern, the same ending Tanya had been orchestrating for me since January 2020. Except this time the target was fighting back. 4 days, Meadows said. We end this March 14th. 4 days, 96 hours. Then either Tanya would have legal control of my estate and my person, or I'd have evidence enough to destroy her completely. I knew which outcome I was planning for. Saturday afternoon, I watched from the staircase landing, while Meadow confronted Tanya in the living room. Not a confrontation exactly, more like two chess players studying the board before the final moves. I've been thinking, Meadow said, her voice carrying the practiced warmth of someone who'd learned to hide calculation behind concern. About Tuesday, the hearing. Tanya looked up from the financial documents she'd been arranging on the coffee table. More paperwork, more signatures she'd need me to provide, more legal architecture around my disappearance. What about it, dear? I want to make sure my father is well taken care of. Meadow sat across from her posture, open expression, earnest. Perfect performance. I'll take him to court personally on the 14th. A pause, brief. But I saw the flicker of calculation behind Tanya's eyes, evaluating whether this offer represented opportunity or threat. Of course, Tanya said finally, her smile warm and utterly false. That's why I wanted you here all along, to be part of your father's care. I'm glad we agree. They smiled at each other. Two women who both knew they were lying. Two women sizing each other up across 4 feet of Persian carpet and 14 months of accumulated evidence. I stood on the landing watching the daughter I'd barely known for the past 5 years and realized I'd missed something crucial during my grief over Sadie. Meadow had grown into someone formidable, someone who could face down a murderer with the same calm efficiency she probably used in her Seattle courtroom. The two most important women in my life, and one was trying to kill me, but the other one was fighting back. You spend 14 months pretending to forget your own name, and in the final hours, you discover you've become a better actor than the people trying to kill you. Monday evening, March 13th, I made the final calls. Harlan first. Agents Morrison and Keller will be in the dining room, he said, his voice carrying the steady confidence of a man who'd orchestrated 100 courtroom victories. Signal when ready. What's the signal? You'll know. Trust yourself. Meadow confirmed positions next. Simone has the footage queued on her laptop. Jude has the passports and offshore account records. Una and Inez arrive at 10 a.m. sharp. Spencer's bringing the funeral consultation notes. Everyone knows their position, I said. Everyone knows. She paused. Dad, tomorrow we end this. Tomorrow I find out if 14 months of pretending weakness was worth it. It was worth it. You're still alive. Barely. The pale yellow pills from Wednesday had added new symptoms, nausea, muscle tremors, periods of genuine confusion that weren't part of my performance. Whatever Renee had compounded was accelerating the damage, but I only needed to stay functional for 1 more day. 12 hours. Then the signing ceremony. Then either vindication or the end. I knew which outcome I'd spent 14 months building toward. Tuesday, March 14th, 10 a.m. Tanya placed the power of attorney document before me on the living room table. Cream cardstock legal letterhead signature lines highlighted in yellow. The culmination of 14 months of poisoning manipulation and legal maneuvering. Just a formality, she said, offering me a pen, to make sure you're properly cared for. I picked up the pen, held it over the signature line, and paused. Sadie, I said. She knew about you before she died, didn't she? Silence. Tanya and Renee exchanged a glance, brief, electric, caught by Simone's camera recording from the bookshelf. Darling, you're confused, Tanya said. Just sign the paper. I remember everything. I put down the pen. Just because someone feigns amnesia doesn't mean they don't remember. Meadow turned on the laptop. 11 months of footage appeared on screen pills, crushed dosages, doubled fake pharmacy credentials. Jude placed 2 passports on the table. Renee and Tanya's photographs, different names, no mention of a son. The front door opened. Una Barton and Inez Dunn entered two elderly women who'd survived what Sadie hadn't, living witnesses to a pattern. Spencer Hewitt followed with his funeral consultation notebook, proof of inheritance planning before marriage. Harlan stood by the fireplace tablet, ready with offshore account records showing $1.3 million in stolen assets. And from the dining room emerged Special Agent Rachel Morrison of the FBI's White-Collar Crime Division, 43 years old with 20 years of federal prosecution experience, visible in her methodical movements, followed by Special Agent David Keller, her partner of 6 years, his hand resting near his credentials, while his eyes cataloged every exit and witness position. 11 months of footage, 2 fake passports, 3 victims, 2 FBI agents, 1 unsigned document. Tanya looked around the room. Every person she thought she had in control, Simone, who served the pills, Jude, who ran errands, the victims who should have stayed silent, the investigator who should have stayed bought, was standing on the opposite side. And I sat there, pen still in hand, not signing a single word. Renee Gallagher made it 3 steps toward the back gate before Special Agent Morrison blocked her path. I watched from the living room window as Renee pivoted, calculating distances to other exits. But Agent Keller was already moving toward the side entrance, and Harlan stood by the front door with his phone raised, recording everything. Renee had spent 14 months orchestrating my slow death. She'd gotten careless in the final 45 seconds. "Mrs. Gallagher," Morrison said, her voice carrying through the open window, "I need you to come back inside." "I have nothing to say without my attorney." "That's fine, but first I need to check your vehicle." Renee's Mercedes was parked in the circular drive, positioned for quick departure. Morrison approached the trunk while Keller kept position between Renee and the gate. The trunk was already packed. 1 suitcase, black leather, expensive. I could see it from 40 feet away, the kind of luggage you pack when you're planning to disappear and never come back. Morrison opened it with gloved hands. "Laptop," she called to Keller. "Encrypted. Cash looks like 180,000, mostly hundreds. Canadian passport under the name Margaret Owen." She lifted something else. Small bottle. Amber glass. Unlabeled medication. "I want my lawyer," Renee said again. "You'll get one." Morrison sealed the bottle in an evidence bag. "But this is succinylcholine, Mrs. Gallagher. Fast-acting muscle relaxant, causes rapid cardiac arrest, virtually undetectable in a standard autopsy unless the examiner has specific reason to test for it." The alternative option. The plan Renee had mentioned through the garden intercom 5 days ago. Not slow poisoning over 14 months. Something immediate. Something final. She'd been ready to use it on me Friday night, 2 days before this hearing, before the FBI could intervene. And she'd packed her escape bag days earlier, already planning which border to cross when I was dead. Keller placed handcuffs on Renee's wrists while Morrison read her rights. I turned away from the window. Tanya sat in the wing chair where she'd served me 14 months of poisoned medications, staring at her empty hands. 11:30 a.m. The living room had cleared except for Tanya Morrison Meadow and me. Tanya hadn't tried to run, hadn't called for an attorney, hadn't said a word since I'd put down the pen and refused to sign. She looked at me now with something that wasn't quite hatred. Exhaustion, maybe. Recognition. "How long have you known?" she asked. Her voice was different. No warmth, no performance, just the flat tone of someone who'd stopped pretending. "Since the night of January 27th. 45 days. You had 14 months. I figured I could manage 6 weeks. She almost smiled. "You're a better actor than I gave you credit for." I had a good teacher. Silence. Meadow stood by the fireplace watching both of us. Morrison sat across from Tanya, tablet ready, but she didn't push. Some confessions come when you stop asking. "I want my attorney," Tanya said finally. The front door opened. Margaret Sullivan entered, a criminal defense attorney in her early 40s with a reputation for representing white-collar defendants. She carried her briefcase already open, legal pad visible. "Don't say anything," Sullivan told Tanya. "Not a word until we've talked privately." Tanya looked at her lawyer, looked at me, looked at the unsigned power of attorney still sitting on the table. "I want to talk to the FBI," Tanya said, "about Sadie Whitfield." Sullivan's hand moved to stop her, but Tanya shook her head. About what happened in December 2016, about the accident that wasn't an accident. Confession is not catharsis when the confession confirms that every moment of your second marriage was built on the murder of your first. Morrison interviewed Tanya for 3 hours. I didn't hear most of it. Federal protocol kept me separate from the witness. But late afternoon, Morrison came to the study with preliminary findings. Your first wife's accident is now a homicide investigation, she said. Brake tampering. I'd suspected it. Known it really since finding the offshore account in Sadie's name with deposits she'd never made. But hearing it confirmed was different. They used Sadie's own account to pay for it. $890,000. Motive and murder weapon in one transaction. Morrison set her tablet on the desk. The original 2016 investigation didn't detect the tampering because no one suspected foul play. Widow grieving, family grieving, no apparent conflict. Perfect crime. Until they tried it again. Morrison agreed. Renee has mechanical skills from her time running an auto shop in Nevada under her third identity. Tanya provided access. Together they staged it to look like your wife lost control on a wet road. Meadow stood by the window, her back to us. I could see her shoulders shaking. The diary, I said. Sadie wrote about seeing someone at the gallery 5 months before the accident. She knew something was wrong. She tried to warn you, Morrison said, in the only way she could without knowing what she was warning you about. 4 years, 3 months, 14 days since the accident, that wasn't an accident. And I'd found the warning too late. Late afternoon, the house was finally empty. FBI agents gone, Meadow upstairs resting, Harlan handling federal arraignment schedules, Tanya and Renee in separate holding cells awaiting formal charges. I sat in the study looking at Sadie's photograph on my desk. 68 years old when she died, silver hair, kind eyes. 43 years of marriage reduced to a framed image and a diary I'd discovered 14 months too late to save myself. 4 years too late to save her. The diary entry from July 2016 saw Jay again at the gallery opening. He was watching me. Something about his eyes reminded me of the way hunters look at deer during season. I told Leland I didn't feel well and we left early. Jude Gallagher, 27 years old in 2016. Tanya's son running errands for his mother before he understood what those errands meant. Already scouting targets. Already watching Sadie with predatory assessment while his mother finalized the plan. Sadie had seen him, felt the danger, written it down, and I'd been too buried in my real estate development projects to notice my wife's growing unease. Too confident in our secure life to imagine someone was dismantling it from the inside. You saw him at the gallery, I said to the photograph. 5 months before the accident. You wrote it down because you knew something was wrong. You tried to warn me, and I didn't find that diary until it was too late to protect you. The photograph didn't answer. Photos never do. I'm sorry, Sadie, I said, but I'd protected our daughter, and I'd stopped them from doing to anyone else what they'd done to her. 2 federal prosecutors spent 4 hours listing the charges against my second wife and her accomplice, and I felt nothing except the absence of the tremor that used to shake my left hand. March 15th, Portland Federal Court. Meadow sat beside me while assistant U.S. attorneys detailed the case against Tanya Whitfield and Renee Gallagher. Attempted murder via chronic poisoning, financial fraud exceeding $1 million, conspiracy to seize assets through fraudulent guardianship, possession of controlled substances with intent to harm. 2 counts of conspiracy to commit homicide, 1 for me, 1 for Sadie. And the charge that carried the heaviest weight murder in the first degree for Sadie's December 2016 death via brake tampering. Tanya sat at the defense table in Orange County issue clothing, her posture perfect despite the circumstances, still performing control even when she had none left. Renee sat 3 chairs away, separated by U.S. Marshals protocol, her face blank. The prosecutor laid out timeline evidence witness testimony, 14 months of documented poisoning, camera footage showing medication tampering, 3 prior victims, offshore accounts, fake passports, Succinylcholine packed for immediate murder when slow poisoning became too risky. Flight risk established, the prosecutor said. Defendants were apprehended with escape funds and false identification. The government requests both be held without bail pending trial. The judge agreed. Meadow leaned close. No bail, they're holding them both. Good, I said, and meant it. March 18th. Thomas Bradford's office in the U.S. Bancorp Tower, where this had started back in February when I'd first asked for help, I couldn't openly request. Bradford spread documents across his conference table, deeds, trust, agreements, account statements, asset transfers. All assets restored, he said. The mansion, the trust fund, your real estate portfolio. Total value $13.5 million. Full control returned to you as of this morning. $13.5 million. The exact amount Tanya had been trying to seize through guardianship proceedings that would never happen now. The money she transferred out, $2.3 million total over 14 months. Bradford tapped another document. Frozen offshore accounts have been seized. Funds are being returned. Should be complete within 60 days. I did the math. $15.8 million. More than I'd had before Tanya started her systematic theft. You did well, Mr. Whitfield, Bradford said. We did well, I corrected. He smiled. Yes, we did. Meadow signed as witness on the final documents restoring my legal capacity. No cognitive impairment, no need for guardianship, competent to manage my own affairs. The exact opposite of what Tanya's medical reports had claimed for 11 months. I walked out of Bradford's office with full legal and financial control restored. The tremor in my left hand was almost gone, my memory sharp, my focus clear. 14 months of poison leaving my system one day at a time. You think recovery means getting your assets back, but it really means watching someone walk out of a facility they should never have been in, wearing the color green. March 25th, Cedar Grove Memory Care Facility in Southeast Portland. Una Barton walked out the front entrance at 10:15 a.m., wearing a green dress she'd bought specifically for this moment. Emerald green, spring fabric, the color of freedom she'd dreamed about for 3 years, 6 months, and 12 days. She didn't cry, just smiled. Meadow and I met her at the facility exit. Una carried one small bag, everything she'd been allowed to keep during her unnecessary institutionalization. Not much to show for 71 years of life. 3 years, 6 months, 12 days, Una said. I counted everyone. You're free now, Meadow told her. Renee can't touch you. I wore green. Una smoothed the dress fabric. I promised myself I would wear green when I left. Not the beige they made us wear inside, not the gray scrubs. Green. She looked at the parking lot, the street beyond the open sky. Where would you like to go? I asked. Anywhere I choose, Una said. That's enough. We drove her to the apartment Harlan's firm had helped arrange, paid for from Renee's seized assets, the same money Renee had stolen from her victims now being returned to fund their recovery. Justice isn't always poetic, but sometimes it gets close. No, March 27th, Beaverton. Inez Dunn's house, smaller than it had been before Renee Gallagher entered her life, but hers again. Inez showed me the compensation check from the federal asset seizure, $127,000. Not enough to recover everything stolen. The house equity, the retirement account, the 4 years of earnings she'd lost while fighting Renee's guardianship attempt. But enough to start over. $127,000, Inez said. It won't bring back what I lost, but it's a start. She'd invited Una to join us. The two women sat in Inez's living room drinking tea like they'd known each other for decades instead of weeks. Survivors of the same predator. Members of a club no one wants to join. You both survived what most people couldn't, I said. It was true. Una had endured 3.5 years of institutionalization. Inez had fought a 4-year legal battle. Both had been targeted by someone who specialized in dismantling elderly lives. And both had survived. I'd spent 45 days pretending to have dementia while secretly gathering evidence. 45 days of performance while my body absorbed 14 months of accumulated poison. These women had fought for years. They were stronger than I'd ever been. "Do you think they will get enough punishment?" Una asked. The question I'd been avoiding for 13 days. What is enough punishment for stealing 3.5 years of someone's freedom, 14 months of someone's health, 4 years of someone's life? For murdering Sadie and then trying to take everything she'd left behind. I looked at Una's green dress, at Inez's compensation check, at the apartment and house they'd reclaimed from women who'd tried to erase them. "I don't know if prison sentences will ever feel like enough," I said, "but I know they won't do this to anyone else." Una nodded slowly. Inez set down her teacup. "And that has to be enough," I said. 1 month after the arrests, my left hand stopped shaking for the first time in 14 months. I noticed it early April morning while pouring coffee in the kitchen Tanya had controlled like a pharmacy. Steady stream, no tremor, no involuntary muscle spasm that had become so familiar I'd stopped noticing until it disappeared. The arsenic was leaving my system, slowly, cell by cell, day by day. Dr. Helen Cartwright, my new physician chosen specifically because she'd never met Tanya and had no connection to Dr. Faulkner, monitored the detoxification process with weekly blood panels. Arsenic levels dropping, liver function improving, cognitive markers normalizing. "Your body is resilient," she'd said at my last appointment. 68 years old and you're metabolizing this faster than patients who've endured half what you have. Resilience. I'd never thought of myself that way. Strategic, yes. Careful with money, absolutely. But resilient implied something I'd never tested until Tanya forced me to. Meadow visited 3 times a week now. Not because I needed supervision anymore, because we were rebuilding something we'd lost long before Tanya started poisoning me. "Your hands are steady now," Meadow said, watching me pour her tea without spilling. 14 months. I forgot what steady felt like. She sat across from me in the sunroom, the same room where Tanya had served countless poisoned meals. But the air felt different now. Clean. Mine again. "We have time now," Meadow said. "Time we didn't have before." She meant before the poisoning. But I knew she also meant before that the years after Sadie died, when I'd buried myself in real estate deals and avoided my daughter's calls from Seattle, because grief was easier to manage alone. I'd been wrong about that too. Early April, Pearl District Cafe. Jude Gallagher sat across from me, drinking coffee neither of us had poisoned. He'd texted asking to meet, not demanding, not apologizing, just asking. I'd said yes because I'd seen him place those fake passports on the table, excluding himself from his mother's escape plan. He'd chosen truth over family. I understood that kind of choice now. "Do you think she ever loved anyone?" Jude asked. "Really loved them." He meant Tanya, the woman who'd raised him and excluded him from her exit strategy in the same breath. I considered the question carefully, thought about the moments before I'd discovered the truth, the way Tanya had smiled at me over breakfast, the efficient tenderness in how she'd arranged my medications, the performance so complete I'd believed it for months. "I think she was scared," I said finally. "And sometimes people do the cruelest things when they're scared." Jude nodded slowly. "I'm not making excuses for her." "I know, I'm not asking you to." We sat in silence for a while. 2 men abandoned by the same person in different ways. He'd lost a mother who'd never really been present. I'd lost a wife who'd never really been real. But we were both still here, still breathing, still trying to understand what came next. "You helped save my life," I said. "The passports, the testimony. I didn't thank you properly." "You gave me a way out that didn't make me complicit," Jude said. "That's thanks enough." We finished our coffee, shook hands, went our separate ways knowing we'd probably never meet again. Some connections are meant to end at rescue. So, recovery from poisoning isn't linear. Some days, your hands are steady. Some days you remember the tremor and wonder if it's really gone or just hiding. Mid-April, the garden fence between my property and Doris Travers's house, where this had started with a casual conversation about trust funds and vulnerability. I'd asked her to meet me there, not inside where Tanya had cultivated the relationship, outside where the truth could breathe. "You were next," I said without preamble. "The trust fund I mentioned back in February, that was bait. Tanya was already planning how to approach you. Doris's face went pale. Her hand gripped the fence post. I had coffee with her 3 times. I know, but nothing happened. And now you know. The guardianship thing, Doris said slowly. She asked about my son in California, whether he visited often. She was mapping your isolation, looking for vulnerability. Doris was quiet for a long moment. 73 years old, widow with money. Exactly Tanya's pattern. You saved me without letting me know I needed to be saved, she said finally. I had help, a lot of help. Still. She reached across the fence and squeezed my hand. Thank you. I watched her walk back to her house, still independent, still safe, still in control of her own life. That had to be enough, too. Mid-April. Painters arrived to work on the Victorian mansion's exterior. I'd chosen gray-blue instead of the beige Tanya had selected when we'd repainted 3 years ago. Sophisticated color, subtle. The kind of choice that said someone cared about aesthetics beyond resale value. Meadow stood beside me watching them work rollers spreading the new color over Tanya's old selection. Gray-blue, she said. That's different. Sadie wanted this color. The memory came clearly now. Summer 2015, before Tanya, before hospice, before everything broke. She showed me paint samples. I said beige was easier to sell. You're not selling. No, I'm staying. The words felt strange, final, true. For 5 years, I'd been treating this house like an investment property, something to maintain and eventually liquidate. First because I was too buried in grief to see it as home, then because Tanya was systematically stealing everything that made it mine. But it was mine again now, not an asset to manage, a place to live. Gray-blue paint drying on Victorian siding, the color of a choice I should have made 4.5 years ago. Sadie would like this, Meadow said quietly. I think so too. We stood there watching the painters work. Mother's choice implemented by daughter's approval. Recovery measured in paint samples and steady hands. I wasn't going to sell this house. I was going to stay. For the first time in 5 years, I was going to live in a home instead of an investment. My daughter brought an overnight bag to the house for the first time in 3 years, and I realized I didn't know if she still took her coffee black. Late April, Sunday afternoon. The gray-blue paint was dry now, transforming the Victorian mansion into something that felt less like a crime scene and more like the home Sadie had wanted it to be. Meadow set her bag in the guest room, the same room she'd slept in during high school, before college, before Seattle, before the distance that had accumulated between us like sediment at the bottom of a river. Black coffee still, I asked in the kitchen. She smiled, a little sad. With cream now, changed about 2 years ago. 2 years. I should have known that. Should have noticed during one of our brief phone calls or the occasional holiday visit that never lasted more than 48 hours. I should have known that, I said. You know now. She was right. But it didn't make the realization easier that I'd been losing my daughter for 3 years before Tanya started poisoning me. The conspiracy had accelerated the distance, but I'd built the foundation of it myself. Grief over Sadie. Real estate deals. The Seattle project that consumed 18 months of my attention. All the ways I'd prioritized work over the one person Sadie and I had created together. Meadow poured cream into her coffee, stirred it slowly. We have time now, she said, echoing what she'd told me weeks earlier in this same room. This time I believed her. Sunday afternoon in the kitchen where Tanya had measured out 14 months of Poison Meadow, and I cooked Sadie's favorite dish together. Lemon chicken with rosemary. Sadie had made it every other Sunday for 43 years of marriage. I knew the recipe by heart, had watched her prepare it hundreds of times, but I'd never taught it to Meadow. Another thing I should have done years ago. Rosemary first, then lemon. I said, showing her the ratio Sadie had been specific about. She said the order mattered for the flavor. Meadow chopped fresh rosemary while I zested lemons. The smell filled the kitchen, bright citrus cutting through woody herb. Sadie's scent. The way Sunday afternoons used to smell before everything broke. Mom made this every other Sunday, Meadow said. I never learned the recipe. I should have taught you. You're teaching me now. We worked in comfortable silence. The kind of quiet that only exists between people who've said everything that needed saying and discovered there's peace on the other side. Meadow arranged chicken in the roasting pan while I drizzled olive oil. "Tell me more about her," she said. "The things I might have forgotten." So I did. Told her about Sadie's habit of reading the last page of mystery novels first. Her collection of pottery she'd made in a class she took one summer and never mentioned to anyone. The way she'd wanted to visit Italy but always said, next year, maybe next year, until there were no more years. Small details, the kind that disappear if you don't speak them aloud. Meadow listened while the chicken roasted, and I realized this was what recovery actually looked like. Not federal charges or asset restoration, not even the absence of tremors. Recovery was teaching your daughter her mother's recipe and watching her write it down so she wouldn't forget. You think reconciliation happens in grand gestures, but it actually happens in a kitchen, teaching your daughter the ratio of lemon to rosemary. "Do you regret not listening to me sooner?" Meadow asked while we waited for the chicken to finish. About her, she meant Tanya. The warnings Meadow had given me that I'd dismissed as overprotectiveness, as a daughter who couldn't accept her father remarrying as interference, I didn't need. "Yes," I said, without hesitation. "Very much so." Meadow nodded, set down her coffee cup. "You know I don't need your apology, right?" "I know, but I wanted to say it anyway." She looked at me across the kitchen island where we'd prepared food together for the first time in probably a decade. Her eyes, Sadie's eyes, the same gray-green that had watched me over breakfast for 43 years, were steady. "I'm sorry," I said, "for not listening, for the distance, for choosing real estate deals over phone calls, for all of it." "I know," Meadow said quietly. "I've known for a while." But I needed to say it. "I know that too." Understanding passed between us. The kind of silence that only exists between two people who've survived something terrible together and come out the other side without pretending it didn't change them. The oven timer went off. We ate Sadie's lemon chicken at the dining room table where Tanya had served poisoned meals. But the food tasted right, clean, ours again. Meadow stayed until Monday morning. We talked about Seattle, about her work, about whether she might visit more often now that the house felt safe. She said yes, I believed her. May evening, after Meadow returned to Seattle. I sat in the study with Sadie's diary and read it completely for the first time. I'd found it in January, read the entries about Jay at the gallery, used it as evidence without fully absorbing what else it contained. Now I read everything. Sadie wrote about house renovations we'd planned but never completed, Sunday mornings reading the Tribune together, dreams of visiting Italy someday, the someday that never came. She mentioned me more than I expected. Small observations, affectionate complaints about my habit of leaving coffee cups in the study, notes about the Seattle project taking too much of my time. Leland is getting busier with Seattle project she'd written in October 2016. I don't want to bother him with unnecessary worries. 2 months before her death. I kept reading. The J entries appeared twice. July Gallery, opening the one I remembered now, the event where we'd left early because Sadie felt uneasy. Then again in September, another mention of seeing him at a charity function. Something about his eyes she'd written, but maybe I'm being paranoid. 3 weeks before the accident that wasn't an accident, Sadie wrote that she was probably wrong. November, entry, final page. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Jay is just a casual acquaintance and I'm seeing patterns that aren't there. Leland has enough on his mind without me adding baseless concerns. I'll let it go. I closed the diary. "You weren't wrong, Sadie," I said to the empty study. "You were never wrong, and I was too busy with the Seattle project to see that." The photograph on my desk didn't answer, but I placed the diary on a new shelf where I would see it every morning, a reminder of the warnings I'd missed and the attention I should have paid. 5 months after the pill fell from my hand, I woke up alone in the gray-blue house, and no one brought me medicine. June morning. Early light through windows Sadie had chosen for the master bedroom 47 years ago, the same windows that had witnessed our marriage, her death, my second marriage, 14 months of systematic poisoning, and now this survival. I lay still for a moment listening. No footsteps in the hallway, No rattling tray with pill cups arranged by color. No Tanya's voice asking how I'd slept, eyes already cataloging tremors and confusion to record in her daily assessment log. Just silence. The kind that happens when you live alone and no one is monitoring whether you wake up disoriented or competent. 153 days since January 27th, since the pill fell and I chose investigation over trust. I got out of bed without anyone watching, walked to the bathroom without anyone assessing my gait, brushed my teeth without anyone asking if I remembered how. Small freedoms, the kind you don't notice until someone takes them away. In the kitchen, I made coffee. Ground beans myself the French roast Sadie had preferred, not the mild blend Tanya claimed was easier on my allegedly sensitive stomach. Measured water to the line. Waited while the machine brewed. My hands were steady, completely steady. No tremor when I poured. No involuntary shake when I lifted the cup. The arsenic was gone from my system. Now Dr. Cartwright had confirmed it at my last appointment. Liver function normal, cognitive markers sharp, muscle control restored. 68 years old, and my body had survived what would have killed most people half my age. The coffee tasted clean, no metallic aftertaste, no bitter chemical undertone I'd gotten used to over 14 months of poison doses. Just coffee, strong, hot, mine. I sat at the kitchen table with the Tribune spread before me. Poisoning doesn't just steal your body, it steals newspapers' morning routines, the right to make your own coffee without someone watching. Tanya had said the small print strained my eyes, caused headaches, contributed to my cognitive decline, but my vision had never been blurred. That was another manufactured symptom in a catalog of false deterioration. I read the front page clearly. Business section, sports, even the classifieds I never actually cared about but read anyway because I could, reclaiming my life one newspaper section at a time. The phone rang at 9:30. Meadow calling from Seattle. "Are you okay, Dad?" She asked that every few days now, not because I needed checking on, because we'd rebuilt the kind of relationship where daughters call fathers just to hear their voices. "I'm fine," I said. "I'm having coffee." Alone. With newspaper and morning light. A pause. I could hear her smiling through the phone. "Is that enough?" she asked. "That's enough." And I meant it. Not resignation, not settling. Actual contentment with an ordinary morning in a house I'd decided to keep. "I'm thinking about coming down next weekend," Meadow said. "Maybe we could try that lemon chicken again." "I'd like that." We said goodbye, brief, comfortable, no urgency, no crisis. You think survival means dramatic courtroom victories and FBI arrests, but it actually means drinking coffee alone on a June morning without anyone asking if you've taken your medicine. The June garden was in full bloom. Roses Sadie had planted, hydrangeas that had survived through 2 marriages and 1 attempted murder. Morning light fell across gray-blue siding, Sadie's color, the choice I should have made 4.5 years ago when she'd suggested it. 5 months ago, I'd been counting pills and pretending confusion while poison accumulated in my bloodstream, planning exposure, gathering evidence, performing weakness I didn't feel. The FBI arrests had felt like victory, but that wasn't when freedom actually arrived. Freedom arrived here, in this kitchen. On an ordinary June morning when I made my own coffee, read the newspaper without pretending my vision was blurred, and realized I didn't have to perform anything for anyone. No tremor to hide or exaggerate, no confusion to manufacture, no compliance to fake, just a 68-year-old man drinking coffee in a gray-blue house, watching birds in the garden, waiting for his daughter to call again next week. Sometimes, freedom doesn't come like an explosion. It comes like an ordinary morning where you don't have to pretend anything. And to you listening to my story, remember this. Sometimes the greatest danger comes from the person you trust most. I made mistakes along the way. I ignored my daughter's concerns because I thought I knew better. I dismissed my own instincts when things felt wrong. I was so focused on moving forward after losing Sadie that I didn't see the predator right in front of me. Don't make my mistake. When someone who loves you says something feels wrong, Listen. True family stories like mine teach us that survival isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's simply refusing to die quietly. These revenge-cheating stories where people fight back against betrayal remind us that age doesn't mean helplessness. I survived because I paid attention to small details and listened when my daughter warned me. God gave me the strength to pretend weakness while staying sharp inside. That contradiction saved my life. If you're facing similar betrayal, remember what revenge-cheating stories and true family stories both teach strategic patience beats emotional reaction. Trust your family's instincts more than your pride. What did you think of this story? Leave a comment below and tell me, would you have confronted the betrayal immediately, or would you have done what I did and gathered evidence first? If this story resonated with you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Her Vengeance for more stories of survival and justice. Thank you for staying until the very end. Your time and attention mean more than you know. Please remember that while this story contains some fictionalized elements for dramatic and educational purposes, the lessons about family trust and survival are very real. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you in the next story.